I'm gonna tell you a story. Young kid named Homer Wilkes lives about 30 miles north of here. He'd just taken his girlfriend home and was walking back along the road. The car pulled up. 3 white boys took him for a ride. Now, he hadn't done anything except be a Negro. And they took him to a shack like this one. They took out a razor blade, regular old razor blade like this one. And they pulled down his pants. They spread his legs. They sliced off his scrotum. Put it in a coffee cup. Do you know how much you bleed when somebody cuts off your balls? Huh? When they found Homer, they said he looked like he'd been dipped in blood up to his waist. He was barely alive when they got him to the hospital, and he can hardly walk now. Mayor, we know you know who was there when those 3 civil rights boys was murdered. We know you know who pulled the trigger. Is there something you want to say to me?
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Wednesday, May 25th, 2016. So I have been told the audio clip we started the broadcast, that was from the film Mississippi Burning, which is fictitious, dangerously fictitious in my opinion and others, about the murder of the 3 civil rights workers in the summer of 1964. The film came out in the 80s. For all of the distortion that the film promotes, that one scene, very significant for our topic for today's program. Today's broadcast, Dr. Tommy Curry, one of our favorite guests here at the Context of White Supremacy. He was with us earlier this month, and we asked him for some books that he might recommend. He thinks are constructive. He generally very well read and has suggested a number of great texts down through the years. And he said, our guest for today's program, he said, you should check out her book, great information about racism, white supremacy, and specifically her analysis of race and gender. Her text, Measuring Manhood, Race, and the Science of Masculinity, 1830 to 1934. He thought we would get quite a bit out of it, and I was able to follow up with her to see if we could have her on the program to discuss the text. Should be some great information, actually a lot of overlap with a lot of the books that we have been reading and other guests that we've had on the program for 2016, including Medical Apartheid, Harriet A. Washington. I would submit the Sublets book, The American Slave Coast, which I think might be the best book that I've read for 2016, and a few of the other texts that we've read. I think you'll hear some familiar names as we work through her book. She, in addition to writing this book, is an assistant professor in the Gender and Women's Studies Department at the University of Kentucky. Her research interests include African American history and women's gender history. I think her new project that she's working on, the terrorist assault on the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1985, which we have also discussed here on this program. Eager to hear what that project is going to look like down the road. The one-woman army joining us live, Dr. Melissa N. Stein. Dr. Stein, are you with us?
I am. Thank you for inviting me today.
For sure. Anything that you think would be important for our listeners to know about who you are, the work that you do before we get started?
Well, just I wanted to mention the framing of the MOVE disaster of 1985 that you just introduced. One of the chapters that I actually anticipate in that book is on the kind of contested meaning of terrorism, and the kind of long history of the term racial terrorism to describe things like lynching, violent race riots like in Tulsa in the early 20th century and so on, and then the way in which the media and city officials described MOVE themselves as somehow a terrorist organization rather than victims of racial terrorism. So that kind of contestation over the term terrorism when it gets wrapped up around race.
Absolutely. I think Dr. Osgood, when he was on the program, he did the documentary film, Let the Fire Burn. I think that was a key part of the discussion, what gets labeled an act of terrorism or whom gets labeled a terrorist. That was a key part of our discussion back then. Great film, Let the Fire Burn. Would encourage folks to check that out. Before we...
Yeah, I did a screening of that film at our campus here, tied into a class I taught on Ferguson in historical perspective. So as one of the kind of public events for that class, we did a screening and discussion of Let the Fire Burn. It's a wonderful film.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before we get started, for folks who have not seen you, you are a white woman, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right on. This program, I use the term racism and the term white supremacy. I use them as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. The definition I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Absolutely. I would, as a historian, I would have to add. So you mentioned I'm in a gender and women's studies department. My PhD is in history from Rutgers. So I would have to add the historical caveat about how the concept of white supremacy is a fairly new one, right? I mean, it's not transhistoric. Racism itself, as we know it today, and race, as we know it today, is not a transhistoric concept, and really came into being alongside chattel slavery. So relatively recent in the history of human beings. So that would be my caveat. And one of the things that I think is important about that caveat is I would like to think that as such a recent concept and such a recent oppressive system, it can also have a short, ideally a short history, perhaps in the grand scheme of humanity. That would be my idealistic hope, right? That if it was a recent invention, it can be, written away as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. There would be no point in you doing the work that you do or us doing this program if it couldn't be solved. So, yes. Absolutely.
And the global aspect too. I would just because you did introduce the project on MOVE, I would like to add there as well. I just got back from a research trip to Philadelphia. I've been going back for the anniversary events every year, every May 13th. So I went last year for the 30th. I went again this year for the for the 31st anniversary. Smaller, but still pretty powerful. And one of the things that is really noteworthy about that particular event is how many people were there making global connections and global solidarity alliances. There were people there from the Free Palestine movement. There were people there doing solidarity work around race in France, around Islamophobia, and so on. So they were making surviving MOVE members and their allies at this anniversary event were making some of the global connections that you just discussed.
Absolutely important. Let's see how much material we can cover in the time that we have you from the text that you've written. Actually, two quick questions I want to get to before we get to your book. Number one, as a white person in discussions on racism, white supremacy, have there ever been times when you've been speaking with a non-white person when you have not been honest in any way in terms of withholding pertinent information or not being as accurate and clear as possible? Okie doke, folks. We are all back, and we have Dr. Stein back with us. So I will question back again. Has there ever been, as a white woman, has there ever been any time when you've been discussing racism, white supremacy with non-white people where you have not been honest, meaning not or withholding pertinent information and or not being completely accurate, as clear as possible when discussing these issues?
You mean transparent about my own kind of standpoint? Is that the sense that you mean?
All of the above, in terms of you personally, your complicity as a white woman in the system of racism, and or just discussing whether it's talking about mood, talking about the details in your book, discussing any aspect of racism, white supremacy, you personally or in general discussing these issues.
Okay, sure. I guess a couple different things to say on that. One, because I am kind of coming from a feminist theoretical perspective and in a gender and women's studies department, where that kind of transparency is very fundamental to what we do about, talking about our own standpoint, our own relationship to the work, and so on. So absolutely, that's something I feel like is pretty transparent in my work. One of the things kind of related to the first book, I teach a lot of classes on feminist science studies and on gender, race, and science now, particularly around scientific racism. One of the kind of fundamental beliefs in feminist science studies and science studies is that, you can never divorce science. There's no such thing as unbiased science, right? There's no such thing as neutral science because science is done by scientists who are never neutral. I feel the same way about scholarship, right? I mean, that there's always a scholar behind the scholarship. I think the personal connection comes through more for me, or is perhaps more obvious in regards to the MOVE project. And I can tell you a little bit about how I came to that project, and I think it gets at some of what you're asking. I originally anticipated that as a project perhaps even further down in my career because it was one that I conceived of as fairly personal. I am from the Philadelphia suburbs. Lived in Philadelphia for quite some time as well. And MOVE happened when I was a child. The MOVE disaster was the first news event that I was ever aware of as a child, that I ever paid attention to, much like the JFK assassination, for, the generation before, or the Watts riots, things like that, right? These major news events. And I was about 9 when all of this was going on. We could see the fire. We could see the smoke over the skyline from where we lived. We lived in an inner suburb. And I remember that kind of has always shaped my memory of Philadelphia as this place that I love, but has this kind of dissonant place in my memory as the city that bombed itself as well, right? So even as a child paying attention to it, and in particular, reading and seeing a lot of the human interest stories about Birdie Africa, the lone child survivor, who was not that much older than myself. There was a lot of human interest stories in like People magazine that kind of pitched him as having been saved from MOVE, right? And he had this like Cinderella happy ending story. But even as a young kid, something didn't sit right about that with me. It never seemed like the whole story. He didn't seem happy. He didn't seem like he had gotten a happy ending. So it's always been this kind of memory, a personal memory in the back of my mind, as, maybe my first awareness of racism as a child. Now, fast forward, I'm in graduate school, at Rutgers, doing African American history, and Katrina happens. And each year after Hurricane Katrina, one of the things that I noticed, that with each passing anniversary and the kind of marking of that particular tragedy, it over time became de-raced in the media. It became less and less a story about environmental racism and disparity, about who lives in high ground, who gets out, who has the opportunity to get out, who gets left behind, all of these things. And more and more over time, at least in the national media, it became a story about a hurricane, a natural disaster, as opposed to a profoundly unnatural disaster and unjust disaster. And that was it reminded me a lot of my memories of MOVE, how over the course of my life.
Dr. Stein, can I hop in really quick? And this is one of the things I've noted in having discussions about racism, I would say particularly with white people sometimes. If you ask a direct question, the response can tarry. You might be going back to the question, but it does seem like a deviation. In terms of your answer to the question about if you have been completely honest when you talk to non-white people about racism, and that includes not leaving out pertinent information and or being as clear, and this might even go to why I'm hopping in, being as clear and precise with your answers as possible. When you talk about racism, have you ever been dishonest in talking to non-white people? It would seem like that would be a yes or no, and then you can qualify your statement. It seems like we're getting a lot of background information about what has influenced you as a white person and your understanding of racism, but that's not really answering the question.
Okay, I would like to think that no. When I've talked about the MOVE project, when I presented about the MOVE project, I've talked about how, as a white child, I, growing up in the area, got one kind of side of the story from family members, from, even my interpretation of the media as a child, right? And it wasn't until I was studying race and history that I started to understand these dynamics that I wouldn't have never been exposed to had I not gone into African American history as kind of a scholarly pursuit. So I've often talked about that positionality, and that that some of that dissonance is actually a stand-in for the kind of national dissonance about the memory of MOVE, right? That MOVE is far more likely to be discussed and memorialized even today in Black media. And when the 30th anniversary happened last year, among the only national references I saw to it were in Black media programs, radio shows. The only, ostensibly, race-neutral national media that I saw cover it was NPR. So I have tried to kind of use myself as an example of kind of white forgetting, or of failure to engage on a particular level with what happened there, right? And that story was not as often portrayed now, this kind of story of a cult gone wrong, a cult standoff gone wrong. That's typically how it's portrayed today, even in the context of Black Lives Matter movement. And it was fundamentally a story about race, racism, white supremacy, and policing. So I don't know if that gets a little closer to your answer, to your question.
The initial response before we got back to MOVE, I would like to think no. That is interesting, but yes, that does answer the question. I would like to think no. The second question before we get to measuring manhood, I've been trying to ask as many of our white guests as possible. And I guess even before I ask that, it's just to make sure that we do have listeners who'd like to ask questions. I want to try and cover as much of measuring manhood as we can in the time that we have you. So if we could be as efficient as possible with your responses, certainly don't skimp on giving us the detail, but we do want to try and cover as much as we can. I have been sharing, this is a piece that was written by a non-white author. The author, he was talking about racism, and he wrote a sentence. I want to get your thoughts to see if you think this sentence is accurate. His sentence, white people are often sincerely and greatly pained by racism, but rarely are they pained enough. And I really just want to focus on the first part of the sentence. White people are often sincerely and greatly pained by racism. Your experience with white people, your studies, you are a white woman. Do you think that is an accurate, truthful statement that white people are often sincerely and greatly pained by racism? And we mean like a sizable, a significant number of white people.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't think there are enough white. The full sentence was about that. Even the white people that the sizable number of white people that are pained by it are not pained enough. I think I would even flip that sentence around and say that there are not enough white people that are truly and sincerely pained by racism and white supremacy. Or not pained enough to interrogate their own privilege in ways that really matter, right? That would be my response. I agree that they're not pained enough, but I would also say there are not enough white people who are pained at all. If that doesn't seem too jaded.
We're just shooting for accuracy.
Yeah.
Just shooting for accuracy. I've said this piece came out at the end of 2014, and it was in the Atlantic. I've said consistently that I think that is highly inaccurate, and to have something in a mainstream publication where you've got lots and lots of readers who are picking that up, and that's impacting how they think about racism and white people. It is a tragedy to have something that is that flawed being, printed and published, and no pushback, no questioning.
Donald Trump is an example of the fact that there are not enough white people who are pained by white supremacy or racism, right?
I will bring that up once we get a little further into
Okay.
Measuring Manhood. I have a Donald Trump question to relate. For the book, for you to just kind of lay out for people, I'm sure we have listeners who have not read Measuring Manhood, to kind of lay out what this text is about, why you wrote it, what problem you were looking to investigate. I just want to read a quick snippet to see if this kind of gets to the heart of some of the issues that you interrogate in the book. And again, remind listeners, some of the names in this book should be familiar, particularly people who've been following Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid, Session 6 this Friday. Some of these names should be very, very familiar. So you write, but more important for Samuel A. Cartwright, race literally seemed to be located more wholly in men. His readers agreed even when they called out for more evidence in support of his other claims. In an article that analyzed Cartwright's theories on racial mixture, the editors of the Georgia Blister and Critic noted the genital organs are the last parts of the body that lose all trace of the negro. The scrotum of the brightest mulatto is found almost black. Strangely, while the article was otherwise about ovary cells, the editors did not follow up their example about the almost black scrotum with a corollary about female genitalia. Even when ostensibly discussing female anatomy, scientists were most interested in the impact of race on men. Moreover, here race was not simply more prominent in the bodies of men, it permeated the very body parts that distinguished them as men. Mm-hmm. The book, what was the purpose? Is this paragraph kind of hitting the core of some of the issues you're going to be talking about?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, that is a very, very, very good quote to pull out. I believe that even I would add to it that there are times that that a lot of these scientists seem to be talking about human beings more generally. Even when they would use like what we call the masculine generic, the races of man or mankind, that we think of as gender neutral but really aren't. They really did mean men. They were focusing predominantly on men because it was, it was men who were running the show. It was men who could vote. It was men who could lead. It was men who had to be subjugated into slavery, right? So they were interested in men in terms of competition for supremacy in other races of men, including, immigrant men, Native American men to a lesser extent, Black men certainly, because they envisioned the struggle for supremacy as a struggle over manhood.
Fascinating. And I guess with this text, it seems to me that not only are you interrogating how you have all of this, as you said, racial science, where they come up with all these different theories and studies and collecting all this data, studying skulls, all of this information that supports the subjugation, abuse of Black people, males and females. And again, even a lot of this is still focused on Black males specifically as the greater threat with regards to the system of racism, white supremacy, and Black males coming to symbolize everything that is wrong, the threat of Blackness. Is that accurate?
Yes. And, I think, you're very right to keep reminding your listeners of the connection to Harriet Washington's wonderful book, because I think, when I started studying scientific racism, one of the things I was disturbed by is how many people kind of wrote it off, like 19th century scientific racism, as simply pseudoscience that is laughable by today's standards. And I found that really dangerous because it fails to take into account how much those ideas impacted living human beings, how much African Americans were victimized in very tangible ways, not unlike the snippet from Mississippi Burning that you began this program with. The ideas propagated by these scientists and legitimized by science gave rise to the kind of on-the-ground violence that you described in that, or that you played in that clip. So I think we have to kind of reconcile or reckon with this history of scientific racism, because it did and continues to impact policy around race, the way African-American people have been treated historically and today, the devaluing of Black bodies, and so on.
For sure. This is a passage, and this theme kind of comes up consistently. In fact, this is in Harriet Washington, Medical Apartheid. We just talked about this, and where she breaks down the etymology of the term mulatto. You write, perhaps not surprisingly, in a society in which Black women, particularly slaves, so often faced sexual exploitation that made the paternity of their children either difficult to ascertain or all too often tempting for whites to ignore, white men wanted to believe that mulatto women in particular were sterile, at least by the fourth cross. I guess, number one, can you just talk about this constant theory that comes up about this is proof of the defectiveness of Black people, that mulattoes are going to be sterile, they're going to die off, and even how this is connected to, later on in the book, these ideas that Black people are just going to die off altogether now that slavery's over with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's some consistency in the ideas about race mixing, but then there's some really noticeable differences over time, too, in terms of the period that coincides with slavery and then after slavery. Because during slavery, those articles by Samuel Cartwright about, how many, that mulattoes are sterile. Well, of course, you have evidence all over the South that is not true, right? So they constantly have to kind of keep massaging the theories to fit the living evidence to the contrary, right? So, well, they're sterile by the fourth cross, of course, and how are you going to, prove otherwise? But what that serves to do is that it serves to distract and neutralize the rape of Black women by white men under the system of slavery as part of the system. And when slavery is gone, race mixing takes on this really threatening character that, will so pollute the American kind of blood pool that it threatens both whites and blacks, in this kind of logic of race mixing as threat without the structure of slavery to kind of rein race mixing into one direction, right, where it's white men with total ownership over black women's bodies, and it's an economic system, right, that rape produces new slaves. That changes entirely after slavery is abolished. So the kind of discourse, scientific discourse around race mixture changes as well.
Getting to, I guess, the other aspect of the paragraph that I mentioned, and even in your response, this rape of black females specifically. When I had Ned and Constance Sublett on the program, they wrote The American Slave Coast, outstanding book. That's one of the main theme, I would argue, that's the main theme of their book, that fundamental, a requirement of the slave system that operated in this part of the world. It was necessary. It demanded the rape of black females to be perpetuated in order to have a next generation of slaves, and that was rape, whether it was white men raping enslaved black females or them getting enslaved black males to rape black females and produce children that way. Either or, it is all requiring the rape of black females. I asked them, would it be accurate to say that the rape of black people is a fundamental aspect of white culture all the way up to 2016. And when I asked, I said not only their work, but I included the work of Danielle McGuire at the Dark End of the Street, the recent case in Oklahoma with Daniel Holtzclaw, where he was convicted of exclusively raping black females, 13 of them that we know about. The case that just came out last week in Syracuse, where a former Syracuse officer was convicted not of rape, but of misconduct, where he was accused of raping a black female. And even one of the earlier books that we talked about this year, The Half Has Never Been Told, Edward Baptist, that's a main theme in his book as well. Would that be accurate to say that the rape of black people is a fundamental aspect of white culture?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's one of the things that buttresses white supremacy. And I would add to that it doesn't simply have to always be rape, but the omnipresent threat of rape as well. The idea that black bodies are persistently and consistently vulnerable to white violence, be it sexual or otherwise. Richard Wright spoke very eloquently of lynching in similar terms in the early 20th century in 12 million Black Voices, that the threat of lynching, which itself, as the clip you started the show with demonstrates, was a sexualized act. It was an act of racial and sexual violence against black men. The threat of lynching was a way of policing black people and buttressing white supremacy. Absolutely.
As I said, Dr. Curry, he recommended your book, and he was kind enough to even toss in a question or three that he hoped we could ask as well. So, per Dr. Tommy Curry, and this was so fitting for today's program. In fact, I can even set up his, when I said before, our timing is impeccable here on the Cows. The Washington Post today, and tons of our listeners.
Horrified.
The article that they had, white high school football players in Idaho charged in rape of black disabled teammate with a coat hanger. This, Dr. Curry all the way, because we just, days ago talked about disability and racism together and ignoring disabled black males and how they still constitute a threat, someone who can be victimized. Just for listeners who are not aware, the report, it reads, when a teammate held out his arms after football practice in their high school locker room, the student thought he was about to get a hug. Instead, he got viciously raped, authorities say. As the teammate restrained the victim, another football player allegedly thrust a coat hanger into the victim's rectum, according to a criminal complaint. Then a third teammate kicked the coat hanger several times. The October 23, 2015 incident has rocked the tiny town of Dietrich, Idaho, this spring. After several months of investigation, the state attorney general's office filed sexual assault charges against the three. Two of the teenagers are being charged as adults and could face life in prison under Idaho law. Earlier this month, the victim's family filed a $10 million lawsuit against Dietrich High School. According to the lawsuit, the attack wasn't a one-off, but rather the culmination of months of racist abuse by white students against the victim, who is black. The victim was taunted and called racist names by other members of the team, which names included Kool-Aid, chicken eater, watermelon, and nigger, the suit alleges. Now, Dr. Curry's question. He says, if black men were subject to rape by white men and women, lynched, castrated, and defined biologically as the rapist, why are black males not understood as victims of sexual oppression?
I would say that black intellectuals, through, at least through the historical time periods that I've studied, 19th century, to the present, have certainly understood black men as victims of sexual oppression, right? Like Richard Wright, that I was mentioning, people like Walter White, the head of the NAACP in the 1920s and 30s, they certainly understood lynching and racial violence, or, to go back to our term at the beginning of the program, racial terrorism, as a sexual act. I mean, it's an act of dominance. This. I don't. The example that you raised, I've been following this all day today, and just to think back to, Richard Wright's framing of lynching, I'm thrilled that this victim's parents are suing the school district and school officials. I mean, because it is so much broader than these students. But I'd like to think more broadly about the victim base too. That those students that did this to this disabled young man, they were not just victimizing him, but it served to victimize all the black students of the school and of the town, right? That they, that as black youth, they are that vulnerable that could happen to any one of them. So I think, it's important to think broadly about who the victims are there and also who the perpetrators are. And I don't understand why the school officials are not being faced with any criminal charges as well as the kind of more monetary charges in the suit.
Absolutely, I agree. I think if people remember the Steubenville rape case, eventually they did go after some of the school officials with criminal charges. I hope that happens in this case as well. We will see how things play. I also think that's a really important point in terms of broadening the scope of who the victims are in this case and how this sort of thing impacts the other black people that, were around this, witnessed this, heard about this. I think that's extremely important as well. One thing where this will lead me right into one of Dr. Curry's other questions. Some of the scholars that I mentioned, the Sublets, when they wrote The American Slave Coast, Edward Baptist, The Half Has Never Been Told, those books make no mention, even though they spend a considerable amount of time on black females being raped during slavery, and not just enslaved black females, as you write. This applies to any black female, whether you are formerly enslaved or not, during slavery and afterwards. I do not see any inclusion. I raised this point with the Sublets. There's no inclusion of black males being sexually exploited during slavery, and I don't really see this in mainstream scholarship very often at all. And that was Dr. Curry's one of his other questions. Why do you think the sexual or gendered racism of black males have been disregarded by mainstream scholarship?
That's a really good question. I would think that some of that would have to do with source material, because the material is just overwhelmingly available, primary source material on the rape of black women, particularly under slavery, because it was part of the economic system. The sexual exploitation of black men under slavery, you just don't see the whites themselves writing and talking about it in the same explicit ways. They weren't particularly covert about what they were doing with Black women. It was well documented, and every once in a while, you'll see some explicit discussion of Black men being kind of in these kind of like slave manuals. Every once in a while, you'll see these mentions of Black men being like breeded or studded out, and they talk about it in these terms that are clearly influenced by animal husbandry and the way that they actually think of their slave stock as livestock, or the way they're being treated as such. But there's just not the same level of depth and breadth of primary source material. I have no doubt that it happened. But you also have to keep in mind that a lot of what we have and what we know about the slave experience comes from the WPA slave narratives. And they're kind of a fraught source set for a number of reasons, in part because going back to this issue of whites and transparency, the people who were taking those interviews with the former slaves before they died out, this is in the 1930s, were predominantly whites. And so they have these white people showing up at their door. They don't really understand why they're asking these questions, and they're asking them questions about slavery in a system of Jim Crow. So a lot of the respondents felt very constrained about what they can say, because of who was asking the questions. And I don't think they were entirely transparent about why they were asking those questions. So it really shaped the kind of responses they gave. So, I've gone through hundreds and hundreds of slave narratives, and I've never seen men specifically talk about being raped. I think what you often see in those slave narratives is that they will talk about a slave they knew on another plantation. I mean, not my master. My master was fine, i.e. my master is still alive and I don't want to be subjected to more violence. But I knew this other person on another plantation that was, breeded out like a hog. So you'll see some of those mentions, the forced breeding, but it's always about reproduction because that's the wheels that keep slavery going. You don't necessarily see them framing that kind of exploitation in terms of rape. Yeah, which it certainly was. I mean, it certainly was. But I think in the sources from the time period, you're not necessarily seeing people describe it as such.
Again, our guest, Dr. Melissa N. Stein. Dr. Curry, he also asks, some authors like Dr. Angela Davis and Adrian Davis have argued that sexual violence during slavery against Black women conditions sexual harassment and sexual violence against Black women today. Given your research, would the same be true for Black men?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's why, going back to what I said earlier about, reckoning with scientific racism, I think these ideas that have been legitimized for so long are still with us today. And I think it definitely conditions, I think, Black responses, fear. I keep thinking of the Trayvon Martin case when you're talking. I mean, it's not specifically sexual violence, but the terror that he felt when he saw this white man following him, and so much of the story has been framed about George Zimmerman's fear of Trayvon Martin, without necessarily historicizing why Trayvon Martin would have been so afraid to see a white man following him. So I think the legacy of scientific racism and of racial violence, much more broadly construed, I think shapes all kinds of responses across racial lines, including relationship with the medical establishment, fears of physicians, well-founded, with a legacy of things like the Mississippi appendectomies in the 60s and 70s, which is, a colloquialism for forced sterilization of Black women. I think all of those things kind of resonate today.
You, in the first chapter, Races of Men, Ethnology in Antebellum America, you write, in making Blacks of all ages and sexes alike in body and behavior, Cartwright placed the Black race outside the gender roles idealized for whites. This was particularly true for Black men under the logic of paternalism, for they could not themselves be patriarchs, only a patriarch's dependent and loyal servant. The ideal and physically healthy Black male in Cartwright's assessment was not a man at all, but a submissive boy, regardless of age, who nonetheless performed the labor of the strongest adult man. I thought this was an extremely important concept for many, many reasons. Just, I guess, first of all, this notion that Black males and females do not qualify for the normal gender roles as assigned to white men and white women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, think how far-reaching that is, because that's why I think it's so important to reconcile with that, because those are the ideas that actually informed things like disenfranchisement, right? That if Black men were not truly men, then they don't deserve manhood rights. And what's one of the most fundamental manhood rights? The vote, political office, any kind of engagement with the political system that empowers, populations or disempowers them. So those ideas about gender and race actually had really far-reaching consequences. And, one of the kind of gendered norms for white women was protection. And as we were just talking about with rape and sexual exploitation, that was clearly a norm that was denied Black women, that if they weren't truly women in this kind of white sense of the word, then they didn't need or deserve the protections afforded to womanhood.
Wow.
So it's rights and protections.
Extremely important on both ends. How do you see that continuing, the evolution of this notion that in a society of white supremacy and where you have patriarchy, that Black males are denied access to patriarchy even after formal plantation era slavery ends, that even after that, Black males are still denied access to being able to participate in that patriarchy. And then the opposite of that, where Black females are denied whatever rights would be bestowed upon females, even saying protection, that I, as a female, if I'm supposed to be the weaker sex, that I should be protected, that Black females are also denied that aspect of being a woman in the system of white supremacy. How do you see those two dynamics continuing even after slavery?
They really take on new forms under Jim Crow, in part in like really tangible ways. So this system of, patriarchy and paternalism, has this white male, has the male head of the household, implicitly white, and they provide monetarily for their family. The women are domestic, they stay and take care of the home. Well, what happens under Jim Crow is that they're quite literally denying labor rights to Black men. They're being shut out of, even after slavery ends, they're being shut out of factory jobs, of a range of skilled labor that they had served in positions under slavery, things like carpentry and so on. They're being shut out of those jobs entirely, which then, feeds into all this racist ideology about them being indolent and lazy for not doing jobs that they literally cannot get because they're shut out of them, which forces Black women to, provide economically for the family. And the only job that they're often able to get is in domestic labor. But it doesn't come with domestic protections because they're doing domestic labor in the homes of white people, where they're right back under white male, supervision and surveillance and vulnerability to sexual exploitation. I think it's important also to note, that Black people certainly resisted that, and Danielle McGuire, who I went to grad school with her. We went through the same graduate program together. Her book, certainly talks about, Black resistance to the rape of Black women. But even earlier texts like Tara Hunter's classic on Black women, domestic workers in the Jim Crow period, talks about how Black women tried within that limited space that they had to negotiate as much as they could for their own safety and bodily integrity, that they would work for whites, but they insisted on not being live-in domestics, that they would pick the laundry up and take it home to their own houses to do, in part to really actually feel freedom from white surveillance and white control, that they were still, they still needed that money that they got from those domestic roles, but they refused to work within white homes whenever possible. And if they did have to work in those homes, to not stay overnight, to go to their own homes at night, in part to protect themselves from continued sexual exploitation.
Danielle McGuire's book, At the Dark End of the Street, very important. Guest on the program in 2011, and that notion of the lack of safety from sexual exploitation that Black domestic workers experienced. Wide-ranging. I was going to mention The Help, but I will fast forward so we can cover as much as we can. And just in talking about the statistics and this racial science, how this was used to promote, to justify white terrorism and abuse of Black people. You talked during the Civil War where a lot of these notions that Black males are defective and they're not really men, they're cowards, being challenged because you have lots of Black males who are signing up and saying, hey, we want to fight. We want to fight for our freedom. Let us join the Union Army so we can go and fight against the Confederacy. That even while this is happening, you have all of these studies that are happening where Black males who join the Union Army are being studied. And these studies, even though in the context, they are not necessarily setting out per se to do something to confirm that Black males are defective and to support racism, but that's eventually how they end up being used. And just one quick passage, you write, one Mr. Russell, when accompanying the 25th Army Corps to the Texas boundary, was requested to avail himself of any opportunity which might occur to observe the colored troopers when unclothed and record their pelosity on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 representing the maximum which he had ever seen or should see in a white man. And they're talking about body hair for folks. He did so by observing the men while bathing. Russell was a busy man indeed and apparently had good eyesight. From his observation post near the bathing men, he recorded the relative pelosity of 2,129 Black or mixed race soldiers. One can only imagine what the Black soldiers made of the good scientists spying on them in their nudity, writing furiously in his notebook as they bathed. Can you talk about how these statistics were used during the Civil War era for racist purposes, and then this incident specifically?
Yeah, I could tell from your setup exactly what example you were going to use. That one just really blew my mind, and in part of it is because of the way that the logic of racism just constantly twists to serve new kind of historical and political contexts. So what he's actually, I mean, it sounds absurd, that he's just spying on these men, trying to figure out how hairy they are. But what that actually is speaking to for him and for the other scientists is how manly they are. And this is right at this moment where the Civil War, I believe when he did that study, the Civil War had just ended. So the new debate among politicians, among kind of public intellectuals, among racial scientists is about what do we do with Black people now, right? Now that they're no longer slaves, can they be men in the political sense of the word? And he's measuring something, that directly speaks to whether or not they are men in the bodily sense of the word. Like, are they manly enough compared to an assumed white body that he never even measures, right? He's not spying on white men. He's only looking at black men, and he's, comparing them to this kind of imaginary white ideal. But he's looking to see if they're manly enough, because that has all these political connotations directly after slavery is over. So the Civil War anthropometric studies that are published, they take on this new meaning. They're originally written in part, they're trying to answer this question of, like, can black men be good soldiers? And overwhelmingly, a lot of these white scientists say, yeah, actually they make pretty good soldiers. But it's still an idea informed by racism at the time, because they say things like, they're really good at, they're childlike and they listen to instruction. They're good at marching. They're very strong of body, but, they don't try to think too hard, these kind of ideas. And that, serves fairly well in the context of the question of, should we let them serve in the army? But after the Civil War is over, what does that mean about whether or not they can be good citizens, fully engaged political citizens with the right to vote? You don't want somebody who's childlike and follows instructions and can't think for themselves. So that same data set is harnessed for a new racial context that becomes far more damning.
Isn't there, for people who have a really good memory, that scene should have evoked some Donald Sterling memories. If folks recall, before everything got to the recording and his housing discrimination suit, it came out that he had been spying on some of the players when he owned the Los Angeles Clippers team with mostly black males, that he was spying on them while they were in the locker room, undressing and what have you, lusting over black bodies. But as I read that, not only did I have my Donald Sterling moment, I thought, wow, there's something really homoerotic about this. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, it seemed that way to me. When just kind of a humorous aside, when I'm writing this as a dissertation, or initially, right, or parts of it as a dissertation, and was getting feedback from my, advisors and so on, and a lot of times they had to say, tone down the sarcasm. I think your readers will be able to do it on their own. But that was one where I just, couldn't let the kind of eye roll come blazing through on that one. Part of it for me too was that some sorts of frustration where I just had to imagine what the black men bathing in the river might have thought of the scientist in that case, because there's, I have no evidence of their perspectives. But, I always... It was something that I tried to find whenever I could find the material for it, to try to have as many of the black subjects of this particular discourse speaking back, because these ideas, were never just, falling on deaf ears. I mean, these African American intellectuals challenged it vigorously and smartly, for 100 years. So I try to get those voices in there whenever I can, but in cases like that, we have no idea, what those men who were there, serving in the army thought of this guy. I'm sure they didn't think very highly of him. So I just kind of have to insert my own eye roll and move on in that case.
Wow. You talk about how this science, you almost want to put that in quotes, this science of sex and studying sexual behavior, how racial science, racist science really picks up in this area following the Civil War and looking at sexual behavior. Two passages that I thought were extremely profound in looking what is, at this time, what is looked at as deviant pathological behavior, homosexuality, hermaphrodism, anything that's deviating from male-female sexuality. The first passage you write, white homosexuals, who made up the vast majority of case studies described by American sexologists, were often described as suffering from a congenital disease or abnormality like a product of civilization or over-civilization. When scientists described homosexuality and inversion among primitives or non-whites, they represented the phenomena as an unsurprising indicator of the generally degraded morality and sexual indistinct character of that race as vice rather than disease.
Yes.
Second passage, a little bit further down before I get your commentary, you write, the same sexologists also rarely use the term homosexual or invert to describe them, instead referencing them by names, complexion, pervert, for example, that emphasized their racial difference and proclivity for interracial sex, the true source of their classification as perverts. That is, while members of either race could engage in homosexual sex, the homosexual was implicitly white. Very profound segments. Can you give us a little bit more detail on this?
Yeah, I have to say I was really surprised when I started delving in to these kind of sexology texts, because I think I just assumed, having read so much scientific racism by that point, that they were going to be predominantly talking about African Americans and other non-whites at that point, which that time period would have been to some extent some immigrant men, particularly Asian men. But what I found is that they didn't, to the extent that I thought they would, because they were far more concerned with the reproduction of whiteness, right? With white people continuing the white race. This is in the heyday of this idea of race suicide, that black people are going to out reproduce, and immigrant, particularly Catholic immigrants, Italian Catholic immigrants, and Irish Catholic immigrants are going to out reproduce native-born whites. So they're very concerned with white birth rates, which white homosexual sex impinges on in that kind of literature. But it's one of these cases where suddenly bodily difference is excused away in whiteness. That if white people are engaging in this, what at the time was considered socially deviant act, then they must inherently have some kind of biological disease or defect. But African Americans are given no such out. That they are just inherently degraded, and so this is just not surprising that they would engage in any kind of range of sexually deviant sex acts. And yet, even, when they do note, African Americans engaging in homosexual sex, they only seemed particularly concerned about it when it crossed racial lines, when it was these color balls that they noted in St. Louis and Harlem and so on. So these kind of mixed race couplings were more disturbing to them than just African Americans engaging in homosexual sex, because they didn't care if African Americans were not reproducing. They wanted that, right? It seemed it fit with their kind of goals of white supremacy at the time. So they were far more interested and worried about homosexuality among whites because, to put it bluntly, it was whites who mattered to them in that regard.
In comparing to what's happening now, 21st century, I wanted to get your thoughts. To me, I found that striking for many reasons, but just this notion that black people, the term homosexual in itself is implicitly white, that black people are degenerates anyway, so, we don't even bother. Anything that they're doing is just further evidence of their defectiveness and why we need to dominate them forever. But when I read this, what stood out to me, at least in my view, what I'm seeing right now, is black people, and it's not even just African Americans, it's black people worldwide, are branded as homophobes and the biggest opponents to gay rights and the LGBT community. I see this play out. I've seen this play out consistently for years. When they had Proposition 208 in California on the ballot, it was black people that were blamed for gay marriage not passing in California in 208 because black voters didn't support this measure. I've seen this pop again where they've had whole documentary films that have come out, The New Black, and castigating Black people for not supporting gay rights, where they've had all these, really important people come out and say, oh my gosh, the Black Oprah Winfrey, she interviewed Jason Collins, Black male who comes out as the first openly gay NBA basketball player, and she says, oh my gosh, the Black community is notoriously homophobic. The Black actor in Dear White People, which is about racism, he comes out and says the same thing. Black people are notoriously homophobic. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, when gay marriage was at the Supreme Court last year, and the decision passed, gay marriage gets the victory. Clarence Thomas cast a dissenting opinion for the case. He gets castigated. I remember Mr. Takai from Star Trek, he comes out and just blasts Justice Clarence Thomas and calls him a buffoon, a Black buffoon, emphasizing his race specifically, even though he was not the only justice to write a dissenting opinion at the time. But he, it seemed, in my opinion, got a lot of the blame. Are you noticing that same trend of Black people being isolated and scrutinized as a race globally, especially on the continent, where they are not endorsing this, where it seems like Black people are being blamed specifically as being somehow uniquely homophobic and against the LGBT community?
Absolutely. And when you started that, the first thing I thought of was the 2008 Prop 8 case, and how completely absurd it was, right? The numbers didn't even fit. That even if every single African American in the state of California had gone to the polls that day and voted against, gay marriage, it still numerically would not have been enough, right? It was just, it was so absurd. And, I also find it really frustrating that, that Black people in the United States and then globally, as you say, don't get to be diverse, right? That there is one Black vote, that all Black people will vote for the exact same thing. They have the exact same opinions, that there's not religious diversity among African Americans or among Black people, globally. And it also erases, African Americans who identify with the LGBT community. They're somehow completely erased in that entire discourse. And somehow they get marked as the enemies of progress. It strikes me as really convenient scapegoat. Yeah.
I looked at the whole controversy in North Carolina, the HB2 bill about, policing bathrooms and what have you. There was not one Black person in the North Carolina legislature that sponsored that bill, signed off on anything. I didn't hear anybody go after white people and say that, white people are exclusively in North Carolina. They are really bigoted and homophobic. It did not get any people that opposed what they did. It did not get cast in racial terms in identifying these people as white. And then going after attacking them on that basis. Do you have any theories as to why this is being done, and on a global scale where Black people are being chided and admonished as being the biggest homophobes on the planet?
Well, I think it goes well beyond homophobia. The misdeeds of white people always get to be written off as a individual, mental illness. The guy in Charleston, right? He was mentally ill when he specifically targeted African Americans to kill in a church. He is not a product of white supremacy. He was individually mentally ill. And the fact that, the vast majority of mass shootings are white men, in the media reports, they're always individual loners who have somehow gone wrong, violent history of mental illness. So also scapegoating of people with mental illness, of course, but it's always an individual act and not a product of white supremacy and patriarchy. Whereas, somehow all Black people across the globe get lumped in together, and they never act alone, right? The North Carolina, and the some of the people that I have seen give the most eloquent speeches against the North Carolina bill have been African American. This whole notion of universal Black homophobia is, it just flies in the face of history. It writes out people like Bayard Rustin, who was one of the first, out gay men activists, and basically running the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Was he punished for being an out Black gay man? Sure, but it wasn't just by Black people by any means, and nor did he ever turn his back on the Black community because of it.
Do you see any excuse me, do you see any comparisons to this notion of race suicide that you touched on before, in terms of whites saying, hey, if we have white people that are engaged in homosexual activity or any sort of sexual deviance that leads away from production of the next generation of white people, that this is race suicide, we can't have that. Do you see any of that in the current furor where white people are opposing homosexual activity in some of these bathroom bills? All right, we have Dr. Stein back. Sorry about that. Did you hear the question?
I heard the contemporary resonance for the race suicide kind of ideology among gay people today. Was that the gist of it?
Yes, ma'am, in terms of white people specifically, and the white people that are coming out in opposition to these bathroom bills and that sort of thing. Do you see any correlation?
It's kind of some twisted logic because I do believe the race suicide ideology is alive and well in all sorts of contexts, but it seems to get a little thornier around LGBT issues because there seems to be kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of logic at work, where gay people are presumed to not have children. And yes, that's, just somehow imperiling, the white family and white reproduction and so on. But then, of course, if they do have children, then, they're also kind of scrutinized or critiqued for that as well. That I'll give you some of that transparency that you were discussing earlier. So, I am white, I am a lesbian, and I do have children. So be completely upfront about that. But I think you're more likely to see gay people criticized when they do have children than when they don't at this point. At least that's been what I've seen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Following the Civil War, you write, prominent women's rights advocates pointed out, though, that freedmen were already one step ahead of women, since married women lacked rights to contract and the fruits of their labor legally belonged to their husbands, a situation they deemed as akin to slavery. In other words, racial inequality provided women a language in which to frame their own protests about gender inequities. Do you think that's an accurate statement, that following the Civil War that freed black males or black females were a step ahead, or I guess since we're talking about black, males in this situation, that black males were one step ahead of white women following the Civil War?
No, absolutely not. I mean, no, it's all well and good on paper to have the legal rights to your contract, but going back to what I said earlier, if no one's hiring you, at the local factory in, Alabama or wherever, and they're relegating you to a system of sharecropping, then legally being able to earn wages that you're not actually getting means absolutely nothing. So yeah, no, that I would not say that was an accurate statement, and I think I don't think it's ever an easy comparison to compare racial issues of racial equality or inequality at any given point as directly correlated one-to-one to gender inequality, because certainly gender inequality impacts women differently according to their race, their class, their geographic location, and so on. So even in the statement that these 19th century suffragettes were making, they're presuming all women to be white and all men to, in that particular analogy to be black.
One of the subjects, I know Dr. Curry and I, we talked about this when he visited us most recently, and it's a subject that we've talked about on this broadcast consistently in terms of the role of white women in promoting, maintaining the system of white supremacy. Great character you include in the book, Ellen Barrett Ligon. Hope I'm saying her name correctly. Quick passage, and then to respond, you actually have a couple that detail, in my view, I think the significant role that white women play in maintaining this system of white terrorism, white domination. About Ligon specifically, you write, she made many of the same arguments as Shufelt and Howard about black men's degeneracy outside the confines of slavery and their relentless and relentlessly violent pursuit of white women. Ligon also shared Schufelt's flair for the dramatic, invoking images of battered baby girls found in pools of blood and pure white women with bruised breasts and crushed skulls, all at the hands of savage Negroes. Her call to action was likewise gendered, emphasizing white women's vulnerability and appealing to white men's chivalry, their civilized manhood, to come to their rescue. And indeed, the white woman must be saved. For Ligon, the vital point in the race question today is the safety of the Southern white woman, and all the helplessness of womanhood appeals to the manhood of the world to protect her with every possible safeguard. Clearly a sucker for helpless womanhood, Shufelt, page flip, responded in kind, answering her closing question of, "What are you going to do about it, Americans?" with, this is Shufelt, "Yes, Americans, what are you going to do about it? Are we of the North to remain deaf to the earnest cry for our aid in this matter from the mothers and daughters of our own race in the South? What in the name of all that is manly and brave and honorable has come over this American nation? Are we becoming so foully adulterated by the black scum of the earth that we can no longer be moved through the spirit of chivalry, through the dictates of honor, through the highest instincts of manliness, to listen to and to heed the distress and danger of thousands of our own women?" Wow. That passage, can you talk about, if we're talking about manhood and even womanhood, how these are working together in a system of white supremacy, that patriarchy is supposed to be about white men practicing racism, white supremacy to support and defend white women?
Absolutely. And I would also add, that it's really important that the Ligon piece was in a mainstream women's magazine. This is not a fringe discussion by any means. It's why I really resist discounting any of this as kind of pseudoscience or a bunch of quacks. This was a mainstream magazine. And then Shufelt in turn was well published. So that I emphasize that all the time. The kind of lynching discourse and the black beast rapist kind of trope that's at its core, and propagated by white men, but also clearly by white women as well. But for white men, it served this, kind of multitudinous purpose, right, where they can write the kind of rape threat that underlied, the justification of lynching, if not the reality. Somehow, wrote white women as vulnerable and, weak and in need of protection, black men as threatening, and white men as the heroes. So it simultaneously constructed all of those groups in that way. But of course, that is not to say that white women, even though they're being presented as these victims or potential victims are not somehow benefiting from this. And they're in the Ligon case, I include that because she's so clearly explicitly engaged in producing that same kind of discourse. At the same time that women are fighting for rights and kind of to come out of the home, to vote and to work and, to have a greater role in society, they conveniently fall back on this notion of weakness and vulnerability when it comes to kind of buttressing their own racial supremacy. And they fall back on this notion of racial supremacy in part to argue for gender equality with white men, including the case of the suffragettes that you were talking about earlier. There's a wonderful book. It's an older book, but it's called White Women's Rights, and it's on the racial origins of U.S. feminism, and it deals a lot with those kind of ideas.
I'll have to check that out. White Women's Rights, putting that on my to-read list.
Yes.
Continuing this notion, because I thought this was really important, and in my view, this is one of the major ways that racism, white supremacy continues to operate, where non-white people are confused in thinking that white women somehow, that they are vulnerable and that they're not racist, that they don't participate in all of this. This is a great passage where you're talking about the lynching of Bert Smith, who was making an effort to protect his black female family members from being raped and sexually harassed by white men, which we talked about before. This is a right that black males do not have in a system of white supremacy. So he's making an effort to try to defend these black females from being sexually molested. He ends up being lynched. So you're right. Without hesitation, they, whites, descended upon him. The oil drillers placed a rope around his neck, hammered his mouth in with a sledge, and pierced his body with sharp instruments, and then forced a 10-year-old white lad who carried water around the camp to take a large butcher knife and unsex him. Smith, who was still alive, begged that all his feelings be taken from him. He was dragged down the main thoroughfare near the camp houses and viewed by citizens, including women. The young boy's gruesome role in Smith's lynching and the presence of women at the public display of the mutilated body represented a powerful and evocative indictment of white supremacy for the black paper, but neither was particularly unusual. Spectacle lynchings often attracted a true cross-section of the community, cutting across lines of class, gender, and age among the audience and active participants. White women were not simply passive victims whose image was invoked in lynching rhetoric. Rather, as historian Grace Elizabeth Hale notes, white women often directed the very rituals by which white men recaptured their own masculinity through the castration of the black male. After all, the black man's super-sexual image was often the result of their testimony. Some women were even given the honor of delivering the final fatal blow. Woo! Awesome. Commentary?
Yeah, you were asking about kind of contemporary resonance for that too, I think white women, are just as complicit in the construction of black criminality and black threat, as white men, and as they were, in the I believe that case was 1930s, or early or 1920s. To me, it always, one of the things that strikes me about the kind of gender dynamics at play here is the way in which that white women in that particular case are actually empowered by their violence against black men, right? That in a system in which they themselves are disempowered in other ways, they gain this one sense of power over someone even more disenfranchised and vulnerable than them, and yet they're the ones who are cast as the vulnerable ones when clearly that's not the case, and they're actually the ones who have the power to direct violence or even participate in it against Black people.
When Dr. Curry, we talked about this in great detail in terms of white women's participation in these rituals of white terrorism. He said that his scholarship, he's found that there's been a deliberate effort to obfuscate and remove white women from the scene of these acts of terrorism, that this has been done deliberately, in his view, in an effort to remove them from being culpable in these acts, in kind of the preserving the legacy or this mythology of pure white women, and they weren't involved and they were just kind of staying at home and weeping and recovering from being, ravaged by some Negro beast rapist or what have you. Have you seen any efforts that have been made to kind of obscure this legacy, to remove white women's participation in these acts?
That's a good question. I think, by historians and by scholars, or do you mean by contemporaries, in the time period?
Either or.
Either or. Certainly, I think the ways in which I would be more familiar with the contemporaries in the time period, the men writing about this certainly positioned white women as these kind of victims crying on the sidelines. But certainly the Black press and investigators, some of whom were white for the purposes of security, right? Like the NAACP hired a number of white investigators to go into the South and investigate lynchings because they would have greater access on account of their skin color and not, be killed for what they were doing. But those kinds of accounts often included the women as part of just how horrific and pervasive the system of white supremacy was, that you had, and they would often emphasize the participation of children as well, so that white supremacy and lynching was so horrific that that women and children participated in these brutal acts as well. So it often depended on who was doing the telling about it, because it was really central to the to white men, who were defending lynching, to maintain that mythical, white woman, pure white woman that you were mentioning. I don't know about scholarly instances of obscuring women's participation. I think because I did kind of come of age as a scholar at the time that books like White Women's Rights were being published, and that was kind of my foray into some of this material. So I was sort of, went into that knowing that white women were complicit in that system.
Dr. Curry question, he wants to know, I guess, specific examples. You kind of touched on it before, but if you can be a bit more explicit, how do you see white women's racism and sexual violence against Blacks playing out through the 21st century?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think fear-mongering, for one. I think the kind of, whether it's explicit fear-mongering or the proverbial white woman clutching her purse to her side in an elevator alone with a Black man, that kind of example always, comes up. But, also in these kind of passive ways, too, of supporting politicians like Trump and these other politicians that Trump has explicitly called all Mexican men rapists, right? And he in theory has some female supporters. So I think sometimes I think not challenging proponents of white supremacy is just as dangerous as the white woman with the knife at the scene of a lynching. I don't know that I would let those people off the hook. as somehow not implicit in what's going on. I would also say, one of the ways that I see a lot of kind of contemporary resonance is in the constant circulation of these instances of racial violence or racial terrorism against Black people at the hands of the police, and the kind of cell phone videos and so on that we see of that female high school student being drug around by her hair by a police officer in the classroom, and I feel mixed about the circulation of these videos because I think in part they serve to raise awareness, but I think, for one thing, African Americans are already aware of police brutality, and I think for a lot of whites who are viewing these, it almost becomes torture porn in the same way that lynching photography and lynching accounts were for a lot of white audiences.
Isabel Wilkerson wrote a fantastic piece on that in 2014, saying exactly what you just said, just racist pornography for whites to enjoy, much like lynching photographs to enjoy Black people being bludgeoned and killed. We just talked about that with Amy Louise Wood, her book Lynching and Spectacle, where we outlined the same thing, basically. That's how I view it, that's what I think a lot of whites are doing with these photographs and videos, cell phone footage, and what have you that's been coming out over the past few years. Last question before I get to some of our callers. Dr. Curry, he says he's done a lot of work on challenging what he calls the mimetic thesis, which assumes that Black men, once emancipated and rewarded the right to vote, gained male privilege and became patriarchs. What does your work suggest was the political and scientific position of Black men at the dawn of the 20th century? I think you at least include two examples with Frederick Douglass and Walter White, NAACP, but your response?
Yeah, I think I think Dr. Carey is very right to kind of challenge that thesis. I think there's an assumption that what Black men aspired to after emancipation was to be exactly like white men. And I did not see that bearing out in some of the readings I've done of Black intellectuals at the time. That a lot of them, when they did use this kind of gendered language, it was often in really tongue-in-cheek kind of ways. So even thinking about writers right before emancipation, so they're kind of anticipating the end of slavery, or they're hoping for it, and they're actually kind of praising African American men in some cases for not being hyper violent and hyper, this kind of violent masculinity that that white men, are kind of espousing, and they're praising, Black men as a redeemer race that could, bring, a more peaceful kind of culture about. And then sometimes, they turn a lot of the gendered language on its head. Certainly Frederick Douglass is such a great example of an African-American intellectual and activist who sees gender equality and racial equality and, racial justice as completely mutually dependent, and fought equally hard for, women's suffrage as he did for Black suffrage in a way that very few white women returned the favor. That a lot of white women had been, very involved in the anti-slavery movement, in the prior to emancipation, and then after emancipation, when it looked like Black men were going to get the vote before they did, suddenly they didn't have quite such sympathetic ideas about Black people as they had espoused previously. And I didn't necessarily see the same among a lot of the Black male intellectuals that I read.
Right on, Dr. Curry. For folks who have questions for Dr. Stein, feel free to chime in. The number is 641-715-3640, and the code is 564943. pound. We have a few folks that dialed in, so if you all could be efficient. We do not have time for speechifying. If you can get right to your question, if you have any commentary, we can see if we can make time for that later, but just get right to your question. Be efficient. Caller in Canada, did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us.
Okay, I have two questions for the guest. First question, why does, this sort of relates to research I'm doing, why did, in your opinion, this racial science in the U.S. focus so heavily on black men, while what you see in Europe is a focus on black women mainly in the racial science discourse, mainly through Sarah G. Bartman, was predominant in Europe? And why do you think there was that difference? That's my first question.
Mm-hmm. Oh, did you want to ask the second one, or you want me to address that?
Actually, address that one first. Yeah.
Okay. I think some of it is a difference of time period too. Sarah Bartman, really reached her heyday in even the European racialist science very early in the 19th century was when she was displayed. And there's a lot of political context, I think, going on too. A lot of the questions that scientists were asking about race in Europe were directly tied to colonialism and imperialism. So, it was shaped by questions about colonizing peoples, and the kind of U.S. context at that point in the earlier 19th century, so antebellum period, was much more about slavery specifically, and then with the closing of the transatlantic slave trade, that's the one context in which they really do kind of focus on women in the U.S. because there's all these questions about reproduction and whether or not the slavery system can literally reproduce itself through black women's reproduction and expand into the West. So to me, it always is kind of tied to what the larger social and political issues are going on about race in the given context. So I see a lot of the European racial science as being directly tied to imperial concerns, and the U.S. About concerns over slavery and slavery's expansion.
Let's see. Did you want to get your other question in, sir? You should be with us. Oh, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that was clear.
Right on.
Now, for my second question. So, when we speak about, issues of discrimination, they'll say, women and racial minorities and LGBTQ, when they say it in those sort of long phraseologies. Do you think, in light of the historical context that you elucidated tonight, would it be better to say white women, persons of color, or white women and then specify the different racialized women and men?
In what context?
So, if we're speaking about, general discrimination issues, we would say white women's issues and issues that persons of colors face and issues that black people face. In a sentence like that, does that make a little more sense?
Yes.
So rather than, okay.
No, okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do I make sense? Does it make sense? Is it clear now what I mean?
I think so. I think you're getting at, some of the crux of kind of intersectional feminism, and about, one of the charges that so many women of color have rightly made against mainstream feminism is that the issues that it speaks to much, disproportionately impact white women and impact women of color in ways that are often invisible to mainstream feminism. It was actually something that, from a linguistic kind of standpoint, that I actually had to kind of write a footnote in the book that reminded, my readers that, when the scientists of the era were talking about women, it was, unless they specified otherwise, they were almost implicitly, always white women, because they would then compare them to black men. And then black women in this kind of metaphor become completely invisible. So they were, whiteness was always kind of the linguistic norm. So unless otherwise specified, everyone was white, because that was sort of the norm, and then they would refer to everybody else with a qualifier. And I think we still see that today and feminism is a good example, that unless, you say otherwise, I think people think implicitly of feminists as white, which is why Beyonce is, such an interesting case to follow, and the kind of discussions that she has opened up about the necessity of intersectional feminism.
Hang on. Thomas in New York, did you have a question for Dr. Melissa N. Stein? You should be with us, sir.
Good evening to all. Good evening to the guests and you too, Gus. I have two questions as well, very quickly so I can get into them. My first question is, you spoke a lot about feminism, and last year we had a case where Oklahoma City cop raped 13 black women exclusively, and there were no white feminist groups that were bringing attention to this case. So my question to you is, why is it that the white feminist groups don't seem to take up issues with black women, unless it has to do with a black man abusing that black woman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a charge that black women have been making, rightly so, for quite some time. And I think that is why a lot of black women with what we would, think of as, feminist sensibilities actually are reluctant to use the word feminist, because they so heavily associate it with white women out only for their own interests, and, only conveniently, as you said, taking up the cause of black women in certain contexts. And, women like Alice Walker, for example, proposed the term womanist, as a specifically African American or women of color kind of feminist movement that is intersectional. I think that charge has been lobbied quite often. And I think continues to be an issue. I think the example you raised is a perfect one.
Okay, my second question to you is, as a white woman, you claimed earlier that you are very honest when you speak to black people, that you don't hold anything back, and you give it straight to them. So my question to you is, I'm sure as a white person, and you said you were I think you said at one point you were in New Jersey, and I'm from New Jersey, so I know there's a lot of very racist white people in New Jersey.
Yep.
So you've been around white people when they've had conversations talking about black people in a negative way. And I just wanted to know if you could tell us what was some of the things they said in those conversations. And I'll mute my line. Thank you, Gus.
Yes, I did grow up in New Jersey, first in Pennsauken, which is actually noted as a very integrated suburb, and then we moved to the infamous Mount Laurel, infamous because of the Mount Laurel decision that tried to keep out low-income housing. So I had, kind of a lot of different experiences in that sense. I have heard particularly racist commentary from other whites when I have mentioned the MOVE project in New Jersey and in Philadelphia. The one that I hear the most often, and it was even kind of a refrain that you often saw in the media in the 1980s, and I still hear it all the time from other whites when they hear the project that I'm working on and know of the MOVE disaster, is thank God the mayor was black when that happened. Otherwise, the city would have burned to the ground. I hear that one all the time when I mention the MOVE project, that somehow the fact that the mayor of Philadelphia was black made the MOVE disaster not a racial event and not driven or influenced by racism. So I think that's the one that I hear the most often.
That is amazing, considering they burned down a whole neighborhood of Black-owned housing. That is amazing.
Yes, I had my irony face on when I said that. I assure you, as if when they said, "Thank God," otherwise the city would have burned. What they meant is the city outside of the Black neighborhood of Cobbs Creek, which of course burnt, completely down. Yeah.
More than 60 Black-owned homes, residences, all toast, in addition to the MOVE facility.
Yes.
The caller at 9516, believe our call in Wisconsin. Did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us.
Yes. I was just wondering, did the doctor, has she ever had sex with a Black male? And after doing her research for this book, if she had not had sex with a Black male, did it make her more curious and maybe wanted to have sex with a Black male after doing this research? And that's my question. I'll mute my line.
Well, that one gets a pretty easy response. I am an out lesbian and have been since I was 18. So no, I'm good. Yeah.
Oh.
No, were you are you after the research, like were you even curious at all to maybe be with a Black male, even though you are a lesbian? Was there some curiosity about, having sex with a Black male?
No, and part because of how I view the science that I was reading. They were constructing conveniently mythical bodies, and everything that they wrote about white bodies, about Black bodies, about Asian bodies, anybody else, was driven by what they expected to find, and not the reality of any kind of physicality before them. They were constructing convenient bodies that served their political ends. So I don't take anything that they wrote to have any basis whatsoever in the reality of white physicality, Black physicality, anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
M1, did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us.
Yes, hi.
Greetings.
Would you say greetings to you guys, greetings to the guests and everyone on the line? Would you say the duality that is being spoken of, white women being complicit in racism, white supremacy, and claiming victimhood was displayed in the Hollaback street harassment video?
How so?
No, I'm asking you. The actress in that video,
mm-hmm.
and this team made this video to proclaim street harassment, where
mm-hmm.
she's walking down the street and she's being ogled and commented on.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's some other things you find out behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm speaking of.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you see something very similar in the kind of critiques of the slut walk movement. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am.
Yes, that it was that there was a lot of implicit and explicit racism involved in that, that it took, that it was the kind of brainchild of, white feminists and had very different meanings for Black women because of the kind of racist ideology that positioned white women as somehow victims of street harassment, and that the harassers were often somehow, men of color. I think that's been a critique of that as well, justifiably so.
Okay, and the second question.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since 2014 December, there's been a tagline called War on Cops.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that War on Cops tagline is a way that whites are using to practice racism against Black people, specifically Black males?
Yeah, the and the kind of corollary of all lives matter, that somehow positions the police as victims, right? And they're kind of defending their own lives in these situations of clear overreach. Yeah, I mean, I think. Yes, trying to, I think it's a false dichotomy that they're creating there. I find the all lives matter stuff to be dangerous because it kind of tries to make race and racism invisible, and demonizes the victims of police violence, which is, I think, part of what you're talking about as well. That somehow even the victims of police brutality are kind of recast as never innocent victims. They're always somehow threatening, even when they end up dead.
One last question. Do you believe white men are engaging a war on cops this year?
Are white men engaging in a war on cops?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, I think they. Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think it's also interesting that a lot of these questions kind of assume that all the police are white. One of the things that I think is one of the voices that I'm particularly interested in these conversations are the voices of African American cops, and how they're kind of reconciling these warring movements. I'm not sure what examples you mean by our white men waging a war on the police.
Right. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
For sure. Our South Florida caller, did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us. Caller.
Yes, good evening. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. I'm calling in as well. Now, doctor, I wanted to ask you, this question was kind of touched on, but what exactly do white people talk about when Black people are not around?
Let's see. I mean, well, one of the other ones that I've been getting a lot with the move example is this kind of chiding that I get from other whites of like, well, surely you understand that the cops had to do something, that those people were nuts, and kind of expecting a sympathetic ear from me on that, which they don't get. But this notion that, well, they weren't innocent, and maybe the police bungled it a little bit, but I mean they weren't innocent, so. The only tragedy seems to be that the neighbors, who weren't involved had their houses burned down. So some of that, how innocent, the victims are has anything to do with, state over the kind of racist state overreach of power. That's one that I get a lot. I think another one that I hear often is, and it's not always just directed at Black people, but often about poor whites as well. This kind of pseudo eugenic and kind of race suicide ideology of like, well, some people really shouldn't reproduce. That's another one that I often hear as well when, not in a mixed audience. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. My final question is it logical to perceive the things that white people do and the 9 areas of people activity as maintaining or refining the system of white supremacy racism if those activities do not replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice?
Can you rephrase the first part of that question? Is
it logical to perceive the activities or the things white people do in the 9 areas of people activity as maintaining or refining the system of white supremacy, racism, if those activities do not replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're asking kind of broadly if they're not directly challenging and dismantling white supremacy, are they complicit in continuing? Is that what I'm getting from the question?
Correct.
Yes.
Maintaining or making it stronger.
Are they making it stronger? Yeah, I would agree. But I think it's so directly tied to these, I know you've had Peggy McIntosh, I think you said on here before, that kind of proverbial invisible knapsack of white privilege. I think privilege is so tied up in this, and it's something that so many whites do not want to reconcile with. So until they can reconcile with the notion of white privilege and their own complicity in that, then I don't think they understand or see themselves as complicit in white supremacy if they're not willing to kind of face down and actively dismantle their own privilege.
Thank you for your answer.
Right on. Just since Dr. Peggy McIntosh has been a guest on the program, but I do vigorously disagree with it. In fact, if you want an illustration of someone who, in my opinion, is not dismantling racism, white supremacy, they are strengthening it, just that term right there. When we talk about what happened in Philadelphia with MOVE, that, in my view, it is astronomically incorrect and an act of white supremacy on my part, in my view, to describe that as white privilege. Or if we want to pick out any other examples, Sandra Bland, the Charleston Church Massacre, anything, what happened in McKinney, white privilege is not the most accurate term to describe what's happening here. And in fact, in my view, just using that term is a way of being very euphemistic about a deliberate system of worldwide terrorism. I totally disagree that white people are not informed, or they don't understand, or they're not aware in some way of what is happening with racism, white supremacy at any point, 19th century, 18th century, 2016. In my view, you cannot be a white person and be ignorant about racism. You will be corrected by other white people. In fact, Dr. Osgood, speaking of good, when Birdie Africa was saved, this was a young child at the time, when that went down, he had white enforcement officers who told the white officer who saved him not to do it. Leave him there. Don't go get him. He went and did it anyway, and they called him a nigger lover as a result of doing it. That right there,
it's breakdown over it.
Exactly. That right there, in my view, is a fantastic illustration out of many. You cannot be a white person and be ignorant about racism. Other white people will correct you immediately if you're doing something that you are not supposed to do as a white man, white woman, and just that entire term, that concept. White people will talk for days, for eons. They will cut down whole forests of trees talking about all the privileges that they have. They will not talk about what I do as a white woman, as a white man, to practice racism. That is where the rubber meets the road. What we really should be talking about, not all the goodies that's filled up in my knapsack that I get as a white person. And Dr. Curry has talked eloquently about that on the program, that is not really saying anything at all. And in my view, whites know this, and they just waste our time talking about, I get privilege and I get Band-Aids that match my skin color and the cops don't follow me and yada, 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 all that.
Well, that's why the title, tentatively of the MOVE book is Dismembering MOVE, because I'm trying to talk about the way that the racism, and racial terrorism implicit in what happened there is very consciously forgotten over time. People don't just forget it. It has been written consciously out of history. That is an act of violence as well.
Mm-hmm. We have people that are dialing in a little late. I'll probably cap it right here. Do you have time to take some of our last folks that dialed in who have quick questions they want to get in?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, dope. Roz, did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us, sir.
Greetings to you, Gus. Greetings to you, Dr. Stein. I had two questions. The first one would be, would you say white people's fascination with the rape of black bodies and black genitalia have to do with the possession and literal or figurative consumption of black genetic material due to their lack of color?
That's an interesting question.
The reason I ask is, for example, like Jeffrey Dahmer worked at a chocolate factory. He ate quite a bit of chocolate, and he ate black people. And also Adolf Hitler also was renowned for his love of chocolate as well. So those are just two examples I'll toss out there to maybe kind of help, kickstart your answer. But thank you. That's my first question.
I mean, I always think of like a less literal kind of manifestation of that as the obsession with tanning. Among whites of possessing, this kind of proximity, or darkening without any of the things that go with it, right? Without the oppression and the disadvantage and so on. I'm not sure about the possessing of the genetic material because, I actually think that people didn't truly believe that African Americans or that black people, globally, were biologically that different from themselves, or they would not need to devote hundreds of years and tomes and tomes and tomes of literature trying to prove it. They really believed it. I don't think there would have been so much effort to prove it. So I don't really. I'm not entirely sure that they ever believed that there was so much difference, but they had to be invested in it to maintain that system of supremacy.
All right, thank you. And my second question is, do you think that part of the reason white sexual terrorism against black males is hidden, and I would say suppressed, is to try and make it seem that slavery wasn't as bad as it actually was? The reason I ask is because I believe that so-called black homophobia, or this our fame for being homophobic is a direct result of of us experiencing that sexual terrorism, and our response has been visceral, and it's being called homophobia. But I think it might be almost in our genes that we have a memory of what has happened to our ancestors, and that is why we are the way we are, even though it's being touted that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think, racial violence as a system of social control, was something that was so explicit. I think I don't have my book right in front of me, but one of these scientists actually, a couple of them, Effie Daniel and G. Frank Lidston, both talked about lynching, in very sexualized terms. So this is not slavery now. This is a little bit further ahead in time, but as a system that would control all black men by example, that they only needed to lynch one black man in any given community to serve as a wholesale warning to all the black men to stay in their place, and place meaning social place, political place, and so on. So I think some of the stuff was it wasn't social control wasn't an unintended side effect. It was the main act, right? And I think the same thing happened under slavery. But so if you're saying that perceived black homophobia today is kind of a product of that lineage, I think perhaps, but in probably more complicated ways than we're able to reconcile, in part because I don't think that black homophobia is as universal as it gets touted in the media, or as simplistic, or that the black voting pool, or black religious folks, or anything, or are as singularly or of a singular conscious the way that they're portrayed. Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. Thank you, Gus, for taking my call.
For sure. The caller at 5992, did you have a question for Dr. Stein?
Yes, I had two. Hello, Gus, Dr. Stein, and the listeners. Dr. Stein, in 2009, former Attorney General Eric Holder, he said, and I'm going to quote this word for word so my question will be understood. He said that though this nation is proudly thought of itself as an ethnic melting pot, if things racial, we have always been and continue to be, in too many ways, essentially a nation of cowards. Do you have any beliefs or convictions as to why that is so?
Sorry, Gus, could you repeat the first part of what she said? It got very quiet over here.
Oh, okay. She read former Attorney General Eric Holder, his quote from 2009, where he said that, I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically that in many ways, we are thought of, or like to think of ourselves as a melting pot, but when it comes to matters of race, we are a nation of cowards. And she said she wanted to know if you have any thought as to why that is so.
Whether or not we're a nation of cowards when it comes to race, yes. I mean, I think the melting pot is is a really simplistic ideal that doesn't actually describe, what most people are even attaining to. I think the coward aspect, I think, is actually really important, and it goes to the lack of kind of national grappling with racial terrorism, and just the looking the other way, which is just as dangerous as participating, and that's why I focused on MOVE, because the national looking away was so dramatic. 10 years later, 20 years later, I think we kind of thinking of the previous caller's question about this kind of mythology of slavery being not as bad as we as it's sometimes portrayed. I think, yes, we're a nation of cowards that don't want to deal with race, that by not talking about it or by not, looking, except when we are looking at the kind of torture porn of, these videos of racial violence, we can look at it and then do nothing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, you stated that Dylan Roof, who killed the 9 church members, you said he had a mental illness. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Well, that's how he's portrayed in the media. That he is just a fluke, right? He's not part of a larger system of white supremacy. He is a lone gunman, who was mentally ill. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to beg to differ on that because him not being part of white supremacy, I think that's incorrect because just because he's maybe he's not with the group who refers to themselves as white supremacy doesn't mean he's not himself.
Oh, I agree. That's what I'm saying, is that he's often portrayed as though he is a lone gunman who's simply mentally ill rather than a part of white supremacy, which he is. I agree 100%. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to get that understanding because he was more about hatred, and of course, white people is going to probably cover that or try to cover that up, but hopefully not, because I don't think he had a mental illness at all. He planned it 6 months in advance. He knew exactly what he was doing. So,
of course.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Caller in Michigan, did you have a question for Dr. Stein? You should be with us.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Gus, to the callers and listeners, and to the guests. 2 quick questions. First question is, who do you think is most confused about racism, white supremacy, white people, or non-white people, and why?
Well, I mean, definitely white people, because they often refuse to acknowledge that it exists, or that it's a product of the past, that we have overcome. So, definitely white people. People of color live it every day. I don't think there's any confusion there.
Okay. Thanks for answering that question. My next question is, what do you think can be done to solve the race problem?
Well, let's start by not electing Trump.
Okie doke, folks. We are back. Appreciate your patience. So the question in terms of what can be done to solve the race problem, you said we can start by not electing Trump?
Yes, that would be a good start, but certainly only a start. I think I was saying part of what's so complicated about that question is that there is not a race problem. There are so many problems that are imbued with racial injustice, and I think it needs to be, very conscious of the way that class and race intersect in the United States as well. Certainly more. Black representatives and people of color more generally within, elected officials, but that's not enough either, because there are, a diverse, a diversity of political leanings among Black politicians. I think access, I think certainly fighting against attempts to dismantle affirmative action. I think, we need to address things like health disparities, that on a very practical level, people, if they're sick and they don't have access to quality health care, then, they're not going to be doing and achieving and contributing the things that they might otherwise be able to. There's so many places to have to address the race problem, but I think certainly access and dealing with things like housing discrimination and subprime mortgages. The list goes on. It's a pretty overwhelming question. I'm not sure the best place to start.
Okay, my last question is, do you think it's logical for non-white people to be suspicious of all white people, suspicious that they're racist?
I don't think it's illogical at all. I mean, I think it's pretty understandable. You can't read, even a book detailing the kind of history that I looked at, and not, I can't imagine not feeling that kind of suspicion or reticence or reluctance. I wouldn't call it illogical at all, and I don't think the onus is on people of color to simply let it go and trust all white people to do the right thing. I don't think the onus is there at all.
Okay, thanks for answering my questions. I will mute my line. Thanks for taking my call.
For sure. Retired firefighter in Florida, did you have a question for Dr. Stein?
Yes, I had two questions, but the guest, you twice have referenced Donald Trump, and perceivably as an example of a white person practicing racism. And really, I think that's kind of like out of line, because what you should be doing, and this is a question, is telling us how you practice racism. And that'll be my first question.
Well, I mean, I actually don't. When I think of Donald Trump, I don't think of him as concerning in terms of him being an example of somebody practicing racism. I think he's an example of how widespread commitment to white supremacy is, that he has gotten as much support as he has. I'm less worried about Donald Trump himself than all the people who are supporting him. I think that's the larger concern. What are the ways that I practice racism? I mean, I imagine I have to check, check that kind of thinking all the time. I went into I'm trying to think of an explicit example. I mean, I guess some of the things that that my scholarly pursuits have actually challenged, things that I believed, throughout my life. I'm trying to think of a recent example of what you would mean. Am I personally doing enough to dismantle white supremacy? No. Could I do more? Absolutely. I think practicing, the ways in which that I practice racism is that, that I'm not actively combating this all the time.
Okay, because in from my experiences as a victim of racism, I don't see anything dramatically different internally between Donald Trump and any other white person. What are your expectations from white people with all of this? Because you articulate racism, white supremacy better than 99.99% of non-white black people who are the victims of it. So what are your expectations on how white people are going to constructively react to your teaching and your books and whatever else that you're doing in line of the subject of racism, white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, and that is what's so terrifying about Trump, is that he's tapping into something that seems to that is pervasive among whites in America, and far more pervasive than most people like to think. In terms of the impact of my work, one of the unfortunate things about scholarly work is that it often doesn't reach a broad audience outside of the academy, and we try as much as we can to combat that, but it's not always something that reaches the broadest audience that we would like to think. I'm trying to keep that in mind with the project on Move and make that as broadly accessible as possible, to try to do as many events and things like that are not preaching to the choir, that are maybe bringing this to an audience that wouldn't necessarily be exposed to it previously, possibly trying to do more like popular writing than just scholarly writing. But it's early in my career, and sometimes it can be really hard to do that on the tenure track. But I think that's the unfortunate reality, is that sometimes this kind of scholarship doesn't reach the broadest audience or the people who necessarily need it. I don't think it's being read at that Trump rally. Yeah.
I reckon the answer is very, very low. One last question: is any one of the children that you have possession of a non-white black child?
They are not black. Two of my children are Latino.
I don't know what that means.
I said they're two of my children are Latino. They're not. You said
I heard the word. But I don't know what that means. Are they white or non-white?
It depends on how you view it. Latino is a really contested racial category. Some people consider it
exactly.
Yes, exactly. So that's why.
Are they white or non-white?
In Kentucky, they're considered non-white. Their birth certificate lists them as biracial. In other states, they would be white. Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think you're practicing racism right now. You're being very evasive. But thank you, Gus, for giving me the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
For sure. How many children do you have in total?
3.
3, okay. And just 2 of them, you said, it seems like they're non-white. Is the other one white or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Through foster care.
I'm sorry?
Through foster care. So I also am somewhat constrained about what I can say for that reason.
Okay.
Privacy.
Okay.
Yes.
Caller at 9516, did you have a question for Dr. Stein?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm just listening right now. Thank you.
Grand. Last caller at 34. Oh, sorry about that. 4360. 4360. Did you have a question for Dr. Stein?
May I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Montel from California. I have a couple of questions. Good evening to the guests as well, and Gus. Quick question. Are you an American?
Yes.
Okay. 9/11 was a horrible event that has occurred. How do you feel about 9/11?
How do I feel about 9/11? I feel like it was a horrible event that has been leveraged to justify even more horrible events. Yeah.
Yes. In speaking about 9/11, let's say someone else is speaking about 9/11. Would you be offended if that person showed any form of happiness at all, any kind of gestures of that sort? Would you feel like it would be like an insult to the lives of people that were lost on that day?
Yes, because I've heard it so many times about the Move example, that the same kind of attitude that I just can't really justify any kind of celebration of loss of life, regardless of who it was. So yeah, I would probably be offended by that, but I'm also pretty equally offended by people's bloodlust after 9/11 and using it as a justification for violence overseas and Islamophobia within the United States.
Yes. Okay. So, do you feel that it's also is it similar to how if a person is speaking about racism, if they show any gestures of happiness or any laughs or any signs of happiness? Do you think that it's the same kind of feeling as it would be if the person was speaking about 9/11?
Well, I think, some of what you're getting at there is, the kind of concept of reverse racism. Is that a bit of what you're getting at?
The reason why I'm asking is because I'm just analyzing. When you were speaking to Gus about certain things from the past in terms of slavery and the rapings and all of that, at times I did witness that you would there was a loss of seriousness. Like there was a gesture of basically you kind of laughed a little bit while explaining certain things, and I feel that discussing racism is a serious thing because lives are also lost, just like it was in 9/11. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to know why was that an automatic response from you?
Let's see. I think some of the points that I was laughing at were about the kind of irony in some of what was going on. Some of the laughs I was having was at the expense of the scientists that were justifying some of what they were justifying through the kind of language, or I'm sorry, not language, logic that twisted nonstop to justify what they already believed. I don't laugh off the impact that had, but I just see a lot of irony in it, I guess.
Okay. My next question is that
it was not intended to be a dismissive laugh. Yeah.
Okay. My next question is that when a black person and a white person reproduces to make an offspring, is the offspring considered to be white?
That's a historically complicated question too, but I think no, with the culture in the United States historically of the kind of one drop rule, no, I think that has not been the case historically.
What would you consider them to be?
I would consider them to be, biracial or multiracial.
Okay. So do you feel that with the premise that if anyone mixes with a white person, they're not considered to be white, do you feel that racism is needed in order for the white population to survive? If not, they would not exist because they would end up mixing with everyone because of the concept of racism not being there. So in other words, racism kind of isolates them from reproducing with others and only enables them to reproduce within their own population in terms of the concept. Do you feel that?
I think that's certainly been the ways in which interracial sex has been policed by whites. Yes, out of this fear that it would, pollute white stock and eventually, destroy a pure white bloodline. Certainly. I think it's
3 questions.
Let's get in your last question, the one that you think is most important that you want to get through.
Yes, sir. My last question is that, do you feel that this show qualifies as a great platform to discuss racism truthfully? And if not, what would your idea of one be?
I think it's absolutely a great platform, and I'm really, glad to have gotten to participate. Ideally, I wish, more white audiences had to grapple with racism, honestly, and that would be my ideal, which is not to say that this is not a valuable platform. I think it certainly is. I just maintain a concern over the people who need it the most, or the ones who are most avoiding the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Gus, and thank you, Dr. Stein, right?
Yes.
For sure.
All right, good evening.
Appreciate the questions. Just quickly, I had a few final points I wanted to get in before we let you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. The first one that I wanted to ask, you talk about at the end of the book where you're talking about Walter White and his crusade. He was with the NAACP, for people who don't know, and he was pretty pale himself, so he could pass for white sometimes and do some of the work that he did. He did a lot to fight against this racial science, some of these racist ideas that were promoted as fact and science during the early 20th century. And you write kind of at the end of the chapter, in the end, part of me shares Walter White's optimism that science has the potential to unmake race, just as it had led the project of its construction in the 19th century. And I thought about that, and I guess 2 points. Number one, in my view, these concepts kind of phrenology and studying skulls and some of the other ideas that you talk about in the book, I don't think it's accurate to just restrict that to say that this is race science. In my view, I think the totality of how science, medicine has operated, certainly in this part of the world and even globally, I would submit, is under the rubric of racism, white supremacy. It might not be as crude, as explicit as some of these ideas, Samuel Cartwright and Samuel Knott, some of the other people that you reference in the text, but it's still the underlying theme, the foundation of it is still racism, white supremacy, and some of the ideas that I picked out that are closer to right now where we are, 2016, certainly the bell curve that came out many years ago. I would say that creme de la creme in terms of an illustration. You referenced Dorothy Roberts killing the black body. She was a guest. She is a 3-time guest on this program. She cites all of these quote unquote studies that came out in the 90s about crack babies and saying, wait a minute, we didn't even do any science to substantiate these claims that we're going to have all these super predator babies come out with all these birth defects because their mothers used crack cocaine while they were pregnant, and you just went in and to all of these racist policies and racist notions about criminal black people, and it's not even based on anything. I would even submit Dr. Umar Abdullah Johnson, who's been on this program many times, and I think others, but he most notably, I think he would submit that all of the IQ testing, all of that is basically foundation. The foundation of it is racism, white supremacy, where consistently black people, non-white people on the whole score lower, and this ends up being the foundation for people like J.B. Watson and other folks who've won Nobel Prize, saying that black people are just ignorant. It's nothing that you can do to catch them up to white people, that this is just what they are. It's a waste of time to invest any resources in black people here in the States or worldwide. What would your response be?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, even something that seems ostensibly beneficial, like something like Bidel, right? It's, been marketed as the African American heart disease drug, and it's, it's got this ostensibly beneficent kind of aim of addressing high rates of heart disease among African Americans, but what it does in effect is actually continue to buttress this idea that race is a biological concept and that it pervades the entire body, and that the races are fundamentally different right down to their very hearts, right? And it also serves to kind of obscure other reasons about racial justice and injustice that could also explain higher rates of hypertension and heart disease among African Americans. Things like access to quality health care, stress. I believe Dorothy Roberts and some other scholars who write on race and science and health have also pointed out, the stress of being black in a society of white supremacy has tangible health impacts as well. So something like Bidel obscures all of those kind of explanations while buttressing the idea that race is a biological and pervasive truth.
You write extensively, as have many other folks, and Dorothy Roberts talked about Bidel in her book Fatal Invention, which she was on in 2011, if folks want to go back. But you talk in your book extensively about this notion of the Negro rapist beast that must be contained, and you're just talking primarily in your book 19th century, early 20th century. Even 2016, Dylan Roof, he's been mentioned before he committed his act of white terrorist violence. He said, "I've got to do this. You all are raping our women." That's what's been reported. I thought of the Central Park jogger case where Donald Trump figured in that, the wilding in Central Park, and oh my God, these Negroes are savaging our white women in the 80s. That even came back up when they got their settlement for being wrongly convicted, these young non-white males, most of them black, where Donald Trump said that this was a disgrace, that New York City has been twice victimized, where you're paying these people off who don't deserve it. The governor up in New England, who at the end of last year said that we've got these drug dealers who come up here and impregnate white women, smoothie and these different names that he threw out, even Donald Trump, as you've referenced, saying that we've got these raping Mexicans coming over the border, coming into this area of the world. Even this has been a big part of the immigrant situation in Europe, global system, where they've said these folks are coming over here, dark people, and they're raping white women. Why is this theme of raping non-white people, why does that continue to have such salience in terms of galvanizing white people to act? Why does that have such salience? It seems, regardless, irrespective of time period, why is that such a prominent theme for white people?
Yeah, and that would be one of those kind of moments where I struggle with with gallows humor about the irony of that, because the reality for the historical time period that you're discussing, from the 19th century and before, right up to the present, is that it's actually been black women that have been far more vulnerable to sexual exploitation and violence than the kind of mythical, black male on white woman rape. Why does it continue to be such a salient kind of trope that justifies so many different kind of policies or racist actions? I mean, even as the time period changes and the context changes, I think in part because it still gets at white male ownership of women's bodies regardless of race. That this perception that they own, white women's bodies, black women's bodies, Native American women's bodies, and so on. So it's an attack on white men's, perceived dominance over everyone, and their rights to the bodies of everyone. I think that's one of the central kind of tenets that, persists even as other kind of social and political context changes. I think there's a lot of hysteria around racial violence, sexual violence. I think it also serves to continue to reinforce this notion of female vulnerability and weakness. I guess it's a bit of, the more things change, the more things stay the same.
You, in the book, you talk about how there were all of these ideas about, hey, we can solve this problem by just circumcising black males, or we can circumcise a large portion of them, or we'll have a policy in place where if they commit some sort of crime against white women, we'll castrate them or what have you. That this was prominent thought in the early 20th century. Do you see any correlation to some of these suggestions in terms of how to fight against HIV on the continent? Some of these plans include male circumcision.
Yes. Do you mean in some of the kind of global public health campaigns in Africa?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, absolutely. And, so the fact that so many of these proposals are about modifying black bodies as opposed to modifying access to health care and condoms and medication, yes, I would definitely see a corollary there.
Firefighter kind of took my question. I was just, because you referenced Matthew Fry Jacobson, who's been a guest on this program, where he said, before he exited, he said, the question, if you are a white person, is not do you practice racism? The question is, how do you practice racism? And I was going to ask you, as a white woman, how do you practice racism? But it seemed like you had some difficulties coming up with reasons or ways that you do practice racism. Have you thought of any other times where you have practiced racism, where you do practice racism as a white woman?
I think one of the challenges, and certainly something I've been guilty of, is speaking for instead of giving. I think this is a challenge for people who, for white people who believe themselves to be interested and committed to racial justice, that they don't supersede and talk over and dominate black people in those very same movements that they're invested in. I think that's been a challenge, for whites in the civil rights movement. I'm sure it's been something I've been guilty of, in the past of, presuming black voices instead of, giving black people the chance or space to speak for themselves. To allow myself to be schooled when necessary. I think that would definitely be something that I'm always, trying to fight against. And to make sure that I challenge white students in my classes to do the same. I think sometimes it's easy not to do that, but, to not let, white students in my class off the hook. I'm sure that I have before, yes.
Last question before we let you enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm making a compensatory investment request. We have lots of white scholars come on the program, so I figure I'll just keep asking, and hopefully one white person will be able to hook me up. I enjoy thoroughly doing research, reading your book, and accessing other scholarly material. I've concluded that's one of the ways that white supremacy operates, where non-white people don't have the same access to information about racism, how it works, scholarly journals, books, that sort of thing. You're at a major university in Kentucky. Is there any way that you could hook me up with the ability so that I could access the University of Kentucky's library, where I could go on and access some of their material, go through and read anything? Is that something that you could hook up for, Gus?
I would love to. Yeah, let me. Yes, I would do any. Yeah. I will look into that, and if not, I'll look into seeing whether I can actually get the library to set you up as a user yourself. Otherwise, I'd be happy to share my access with you.
Grand. That would be much appreciated. Whenever. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, since I'm touting, since you brought up the University of Kentucky, we have a wonderful scholar here that you might be interested in talking to, Melinda Price, if you haven't already done so. She is an African-American legal scholar and has written a really compelling book on race and the death penalty.
I'm writing her. I've got two now on my read list: white women's rights, and Melinda Price. I will be getting on that immediately. I'm super appreciative. We will follow up on that with due haste. Whenever you get the project done on Move, you already have your invitation now, because that's something that is extremely important in terms of scholarship we've done on this program, and just making sure people don't forget an analysis of that. So whenever you get it done, we would love to have you back on the program immediately to discuss. It's going to be a book, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, and please keep talking about it. I mean, that is something that I am very invested in, that people do not forget Move. Especially in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement and all the discussions we're having right now about race and policing. It's imperative that we do not forget that. So keep on talking about it, and you're doing a great service.
Appreciate that for sure. So we will have Dr. Stein back as long as we're still here. Move project, that is just put it on the calendar to be coming. I will thank Dr. Curry, since he was the one who recommended your work. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It has been a hoot having you on the program. The book, again, is Measuring Manhood, Race, and the Science of Masculinity, 1830 to 1934, University of Kentucky's Dr. Melissa N. Stein. We will let you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this evening.
And thank you for having me.
For sure. Take care. We will speak soon.
All right. Thank you.
For sure. Evening. Context of White Supremacy. Wowee. Thank you again, Dr. Curry. I don't know if you got to listen live or if you would check out the archives. I saw he did note on Facebook, we're friends on Facebook, where he noted that the program was going down and commented. Somebody else was asking a question, but he commented. Thank you to Dr. Curry for the recommendation and the question. As soon as I let him know that Dr. Stein was going to be visiting with us on the program, he hooked me up with some questions that he thought would be great to ask based on his reading of the book. We will take a quick commercial break. If any folks have any closing thoughts that they want to share before we wrap things up, we'll make time for that as well. Just quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back. Context of White Supremacy. If you have anything that stood out, anything you want to make sure you get in, just be concise, and then we'll make time. Context of White Supremacy. We'll be right back.
RacismDaily.com, your number one source for global news reports on race, racism, and overt actions of white supremacy. From Asia to the Americas, to Europe, to Australia, to Africa, racism is not a thing of the past, it is our current reality. Be informed, be globally informed. You should be the first to know. RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Do you need a one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs? Triumphant Multimedia is a skilled team of professionals with a passion for great marketing and chic design. Our specialties include consulting, brand development, copywriting, and creative graphic design that's second to none. We also offer photography, photo retouching, videography, and video editing. At Triumphant Multimedia, our goal is to provide highly effective creative solutions built to suit any individual need or budget. Give us a call at 678-732-8067 or check us out online at trimultimedia.com.
Decals, Context of White Supremacy. Thank you to Thomas in New York. I've almost neglected to ask about university access, and I remember we had Amy Louise Wood on the program, the white woman who wrote Lynching and Spectacle, and I did not ask her. And he said, oh man, why didn't you ask her to hook you up with university access? And I said, next time we get a white person on the program, I will ask. I had neglected to put that on my list and then thought about it. Was like, oh man, University of Kentucky is pretty big. They probably have pretty nice resource. So I will let folks know if she follows through and hooks Gus up so that I have university access. I can only say, woo-wee, if you, for folks out there, you have gone through a major university, major college, academic institute, doesn't even have to be major, just generally, man, the resources that these places have in terms of scholarship on white supremacy, it is mind-boggling. When you get to start going through their catacombs and seeing how many books and documents that they have accumulated on things, oh man, when people say that white people are ignorant about racism or that they don't understand or they don't, man, you will see that that is total hogwash. I can say this for every institute that I have been fortunate to visit. Thankfully, I've just been fortunate in my existence where anytime that I travel or what have you, I tend to make an effort. If there's a major college or university, wherever I happen to be, I will go and check out their library to see what type of resources that they have. Man, it's staggering. I could say for here, University of Washington, they are a federal depository. So they just get all kinds of, in fact, the University of Washington's campus, they have about 20 libraries on their campus. Now, that is a big school, University of Washington. They have a student body that is well over 40,000, but even still, they have about 20 different libraries on campus, and that's not counting their other I'm just talking about the University of Washington at Seattle. That's not counting UW at Tacoma and UW at Bothell. That's not counting any of their other campuses, other sites. Just the University of Washington at Seattle has about 20 different libraries. Massive accumulation of resources. And now with everything being digitized, you can go there and get a lot of stuff. But I mean, woo, if you have university access, they have like the New York Times back to like 1890. Now it's digitized. You can just go on and nab any article from the last 120 years and bang, pull it up on your computer. Immense gulf of knowledge. Anywho, folks have any commentary they want to get in quickly, feel free. And being efficient, if you have any comment or what have you that stood out. I will have to say, Dr. Curry's recommendation, I was not excited at first, right? Because I remember what he said on the program and he recommended her book. And so I started reading. It's like, oh man, this is not about what he said, because I was thinking it was going to be about the role of white women played in racism and blah, blah, blah. So I was not excited. It was like, God darn it, this is not what I thought. But I was like, he recommended it. I don't think he would steer us wrong. So I kept reading it, and he did have constructive details. It's not quite as high on the list as The Delectable Negro. That's another fantastic book that he has recommended out of many, or Picking Cotton. I think I mentioned that last time he was on the program. He's recommended a ton of really good books. So this one wasn't quite as high as that, but it was still pretty informative. I will say that the discussion, questions, how she responded, that sort of thing, I think that was much more interesting than some of the things in the book. But it did have constructive information. If folks have the time to check it out and do some reading, I suspect you will learn some things. Even some of the passages that I read, I think that speaks for itself, that it does have some juicy tidbits in measuring manhood. The folks that are listening in, if you all have any comments, what you heard from Dr. Stein through the discussion, feel free. The only thing that I will say, that is extremely important. I've highlighted that consistently. When people erroneously, in my view, say that white privilege is white supremacy, that is not true. You have seen demonstrated on this program, white males and white females, they will gleefully, excitedly talk about all of the goodies that they get as a result of white privilege, all of the white privilege that they have. They will not discuss, this is how I practice racism. This is the power that I wield as a white woman, as a white man, over you niggers, over non-white people in total. They will not do that. It generally falls to silence, or they might struggle and give one example. That is a huge difference, in my opinion, in my view. That right there is an act of racism, because they know all of the ways that they are exercising power and practicing white supremacy on a regular basis. But I will pause there. Folks that dialed in, if you all have any quick, concise comments that you want to get in, you should be with us.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Yes, very good guest. She was definitely very refined, and I think everyone asked great questions. I think the firefighter got her to break her refinement a little. Picked it up with her, and she broke her code a little bit, and from there it was a little bit more interesting. But she was definitely very refined, a great guest. And when he asked her how did she practice racism, man, that was the quickest answer she had all night. He asked her what was her privilege she got from being white. Man, we'll still be hearing her talk now. So just very good, great show. And Roz pointed out, while the show was going on, abducting non-white children, standard, and anti-sexual behavior with able to adopt children, just, tacky all the way around. I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I almost forgot. When people ask that sex question, if you, in my view, it would be best to ask that question, have you ever had sexual intercourse with a white person? With a non-white person, period. I would not put a gender on it. Or you can just say, have you had sex with a non-white male, female? That's the way that I normally ask it. That way you include everybody in case it is a non-white, non-black person. And that way, in case it is some, anti-sex, homosexual activity, you will include everything. And I just got that by experience, because I asked it that way. I asked a white person, have you ever had sexual intercourse with a non-white person, male or female? And I was talking to a white man, and he said yes, but he said, yes, I've had sex with a black male. And I was thrown a little, because that's not what I was expecting going into the question. But just because I asked it opened, I got everything. And then it was like, oh, okay, boom, boom, boom. We could regret. And I think he was even caught off guard a little bit. And this was on the program. I think this was Dr. Allen Bean. But that's the way I would encourage it, because I almost asked her follow-up, have you ever had sex with a non-white female? I would have been curious to hear a response on that, but I was going to wait to see if anybody else asked. But that's the way I would ask that question every time. Have you ever had sex with a non-white person or non-white person, male, female, so that you get everything?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Folks that dialed in? Is everybody? If you're content, that's fine too.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
May I be heard? Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on what you were saying about the universities and the white supremacy knowledge. You are 100% correct. And this even for Black universities. And that's why, regardless of how Black people in general, see college professors, the ones with tenure, and they are few and far and in between Black people with tenure in a university. Those are the ones who can actually see the world through the eyes of the whites. Now, when you get to the bottom of a lot of the adjuncts, it is very difficult for a lot of Black people in universities and colleges to teach that white supremacy knowledge. It is very, very difficult. But that's all there, just like you said. I just wanted, to add that in. You are absolutely right. It is overwhelmingly a lot of information.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
The funny part about whoever asked her about the sex question, it was very interesting because once she came out and said that she was a lesbian, it made sense, some of the conversation, because she seemed to go pretty hard against the white men and was very, very candid. And it kind of made sense once she came out and said, well, I'm a lesbian. I said, okay, well, that makes sense. And then when I asked her the question about the consumption of Black genetics, I'm actually reading The Delectable Negro now. And to be reading that while we're reading medical apartheid is just it's like a thermonuclear bomb in my head. And that's what made me ask the question. And when I asked the question, she seemed kind of thrown off by it, but yet she brought up and actually Thomas in New York and I was actually texting while she was talking, and she actually brought up tanning, which is another form. They're willing to dye and microwave themselves to look like Black people. So they're trying to consume the sun itself in the form of these microwaves to cook themselves to look like us. So it's just another, she brought up that example, like he said, Thomas says, she brought up that example herself, which was just as profound. And I just wanted to chime in with that, and thank you. And I'll mute my line. I thought she was a great guest as well. And everybody asked brilliant questions. Thank you.
You have this book as well, yes? Did you check it out at all?
I didn't get the opportunity to. I wanted to, but I didn't get the chance to. Actually, I'm going to start reading it like ASAP because I have it on my phone now, so I could take it with me. And I'm going to actually start reading it. I usually read like 3 or 4 books at a time, and I was holding off on Delectable Negro for a minute, and I was just compelled to start reading it after reading Medical Apartheid. And my God, I haven't even gotten past the introduction yet. And the assault on my spirit and on my mind with what white people are capable of is just, it's flabbergasting to say the least, but definitely expected because I know white people fairly well as far as just us studying and just my own personal study. So thanks again, Gus, and great guest, and I will always support your program. As long as I have breath, I will support the cows. Thank you.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I was going to ask her something else, but she kept on Donald Trump, and that kind of like told me something about her, and I'm sure that there are a lot of refined white people who are using his example to be this perceivable. This is the ultimate white person who practiced racism. Pointing the finger at him. And I mean, I was born in 1957, and that's from Eisenhower all the way up until now. And every last one of those presidents visibly and consciously practiced racism. And even, of course, the ones before also, but I'm just talking about during my quote-unquote lifetime. And so, I can tell from a code standpoint on what this white person or what these white people like her are attempting to do, which is the bottom result is to further confuse non-white black people, especially from the standpoint to whereas, with all this information that she has and the knowledge she has about racism, that is very impressive to a lot of non-white black people, especially, and it's that bowing at black people bowing at her feet type of sensation that she gets from it by being, a quote unquote black history teacher and that sort of thing. And so I thought I'd just turn the table, and with the expectations that she was going to stutter. And I think that's the reaction that was given. So, it just shows the insincerity that exists amongst white people who are capable of practicing racism, to quote Mr. Fuller. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Great question. I think, as I said, I was going to ask that after the caller. Sometimes I will wait if I think a white person might cut a fool and try and hang up on us or something like that. I'll kind of save that for later to ask her some personal questions about how she practices racism. But absolutely, her response there. I think even the response that she gave when I asked if she has ever been dishonest in talking to non-white people about racism, where she gave us, I almost hit the buckets and buckets of words, where it took a long time to get an answer. And she finally, I think she said, I wrote it down. Let me pull up my notes where she said, I would like to think no. In answer to the question, have you ever been dishonest in talking to non-white people about racism? I would like to think no. And then we got all the words about move and everything else, not answering the question. I thought it was a little similar in that regard in terms of how she responded on a personal level to how she conducts herself as a white person and might be practicing racism, white supremacy.
She went into move too, and I asked her about what do white people talk about with no black people? How do white people talk about black people with no black people around? And, in a negative way, tell some of those things. And she went right into the move. And another gentleman asked the question, what do white people talk about when no white people are around? And she went into another question, well, with the move, it looked like that was a strong point to talk about. And I was happy to get that information, so that's why I didn't, badger her. But, very interesting, very fine.
If it was a lot, I felt like it was a lot to cover in terms of the book and what have you. When I read on her site that she was doing this project on Move, I was like, oh man, that's something I am interested in. I was going to ask more questions about that, but then just time didn't allow. But if she's willing to come back on and talk about the project when it comes out, we can ask more. But I was definitely going to ask her about, that might be an act of white supremacy right there to have a white person coming in to do this, and how does she go and talk to the black members? Like, does she go to talk to Ramona Africa or Pam Africa or Mumia Abu-Jamal? Does she go to talk to these people in Philadelphia about, their thoughts, their memory, their experiences, and all of that? Does she go talk to them directly? Because I know Christopher Osgood, I believe is his name, the white man who did the documentary film Let the Fire Burn. He said that he did all that. He had access. He went and talked to Mumia, and he talked to all these people to get their input on putting the documentary project together, which is very constructive. He was on the program in 2014. Very constructive film, lots of great information. But I mean, he is a white man at the end of the day. I was going to ask her about all that, but save some of that for down the road when he comes on the program. And I just talked to Pam Africa, like literally days ago, and I meant to email her to ask do you know this person? Like, has she come to talk to you? Because she said she's been a fellow. Like, do you know this person? What do you think about her? What's your impression? Blah, blah, blah. And I just, didn't have time to ask. So my bad. I wish I had included that. But again, hopefully we'll have her back on the program so we can make time for that down the road.
Have you heard it?
Yes, ma'am.
To me, it just seemed like not just her, but the other white guests on the show, she was kind of giggling and everything when she was answering questions. It's almost like this is like, it seems like it's fun for them to, you know, study non-white people and then do these books and make these reports and do movies and all this and that. And it's like it's funny to them, you know, and then they come to us and they, you know, they come on a show like your show or whatever. And I don't think they, you know, they don't really take it serious. But I guess, you know, for us or for me, it's constructive because then I can hear really what racists, you know, more refined racists, how they practice racism. So that was a good thing about her coming on the show. But I didn't appreciate her giggling when she was answering some of the questions. And that was all I had. Thanks.
Caller pointed that out. Absolutely. That has come up before on the program. We've had white guests in terms of them finding things funny about black people suffering. The book that was mentioned, White Women's Rights, if you are so interested, that book is available for free online. As I just said, major universities, University of Pennsylvania, they have made it available as a PDF. So if you want to check that out, it is available. I posted the link with the episode on Facebook. So if you're interested, White Women's Rights, just go to the link and you can download the whole text as a PDF. White Women's Rights: The Racial Origins of Feminism in the United States. Louise Mitchell Newman. It was published in 1999.
Hey Gus, when white people laugh like that during conversations, I kind of see that as a form of passive dominance. It's almost like, well, you know, you really can't do anything about it anyway. I'm white, and I find this funny in the moment. And even if you said something about it, it's not going to change the fact that I'm going to do it. It's just, to me, it's almost like just like when one animal might urinate on another animal as a sign of dominance. Like them doing that is like a subtle form of disrespect, and it's done from that same place of dominance that whites have in society.
I absolutely think that is frequently what's happening when they have those giggles. I know we've had enough white chuckles over the years. I think sometimes that's what it is. I think some other times they do that when they have kind of been caught off guard a bit, where they bumped into a Negro that's a little less confused than they're accustomed to dealing with. It's almost one of those, I would have to get some sound clips together of the different white people who have chuckled over the years to pick out kind of what's happening in that dynamic, because I absolutely think that's what it is in some cases, where they're just laughing like, yeah, that's what it is, and, you know, I'm having fun. What are you going to do about it? We're having fun. Laughing.
That's your experience. I think you should do that. I think that'll be a great program, just to be able to look at those different behaviors and contexts, because I do study like body language and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think just to even have access to that, if we could get like a string of clips where we can hear the context of how the laugh comes out and then hear the laugh itself, because there are different types of laughs, like you're saying. And I'm sure you know that most intimately for all the shows that you've done. So I think that would be brilliant as far as giving us insight, because I was texting V, and I said what I think about your show is that the more white guests you have, we get to see different forms of refined racists and how they function. So it really gives deep insight into their psychology to have access to these different white people who exhibit all of these different array of traits that we might encounter in life and not understand in life until we encounter it on the show. So I just think it's brilliant. And I wanted to ask you, I was listening to an archive of Dr. Curtis Duncan, and did he come on the program more than once, or was it just that one time?
He came on that one time, but we remained in contact. Like he was doing a project. He sent me the information. I put it on Facebook, and, you know, I told him I would be more than happy to help promote it. I was trying to get him back on, but I think it might have been me. Somebody just messed up with the scheduling or what have you, and getting him back on. But he was willing to come back and chat with us. I was hoping to have him come back and chat with us, and just botched. Somebody, might have been me, botched it along the way. But yeah, he only did the one visit.
it's all right, you're a victim, but I would just say I thought that show was one of your best shows, and I think it would be incredible to get him back on. I did write you about Umalima Baruti and somebody else. I don't know if you got that too, but I think those two that I sent you an email, and definitely Dr. Duncan, I thought that show was just brilliant, and he helped a lot of people. Thank you.
For sure. He was October 2010, if memory serves, kind of towards the end of. I know that was right after I just got my computer. I remember that vividly. Dr. Baruti.
You did say it on the show. You actually said something about it. Yep.
Yep. Dr. Baruti, I can say definitively, will not be back on the program. That was casualty with the breach with Irritated Genie. They have remained in contact, and all I can say with that is, oh well. He was on the program 5 times.
Oh, okay.
I have no regrets about what I said about Mr. Genie and his association with Homeland Security, and anybody who's upset about with that or has a problem about that, oh well. The problem is still white people. We proceed.
And I feel you 100% on your stance. That's all I got to say about that. I'm with you on that one.
For sure. Not that I have any problem. Be clear about that. I don't have any beef with Dr. Baruti. The problem is still white people. I think we did 5 great programs. We were able to go through some of his work, which is a lot of constructive material, but oh well. All I can say on that moving forward.
Amen.
Did we nab everybody? Everybody who had comments they wanted to get in? We get everybody?
Hey, can I just chime in, man? That Chris Duncan show was one of the all-time classics. And I always refer that show to people when they talk about the huge amount of black homosexuality, how it's just popped up. And, tell them to listen to that show and look at the food. That GMO, that was a great show. I'm glad Ross brought that up. And I wish you could get him back on, guys.
For sure. I have his contact information. Like I said, we had been in contact since then. It was not the last time I talked to him. And we were trying to schedule a date to have him come back on the broadcast and promoting some of the other stuff that he was doing. And just like I said, email got lost, communique got lost, whatever the case is. But I will contact him again. And like I said, he seemed like he was willing to come back and chat it up with us. So hopefully we can make that happen. Folks satisfied? Everybody had commentary they wanted to get in? Grand. I can only say again, I'm always eager to have white people on the program. Not that I think we've done lots of black people have been guests on the program, non-white people in total. But always think it is important to be able to ask white people questions. They are the experts. They are the problem. It is always great to just keep that in mind where the focus should be. And just even to get better, I think folks did a great job being efficient and right to it today so we could get to everybody who dialed in with questions. Outstanding. Great job. Just being efficient, right to it, and getting questions in. But I always think that's great. So if folks find white people that they would like to have on the program, recommend. Our guest suggestions are still kind of weighted to the non-white side, as opposed to, in terms of people recommending non-white people who've written books or whatever they've done to have on the program. And a lot of those folks do have constructive information, but I do think it's important. If I had my druthers, it would be about 2 to 1. We would have 2 white people on the program for every 1 non-white person if, I had things exactly the way I wanted it to be.
Hey, Gus. In reference to white guests, were you able to ever get in contact with Jacob Holt?
I'll have to look back at my email to make sure. Sure we wrote him or not.
Okay, that was the photographer who has it's all dedicated to. He has a lot of stuff dedicated to racism in the United States and a lot of stuff going on around the world as well. But he's like a photographer, if you remember.
Okay, I will. If I didn't, I'll add him on my list. I have a little list on my Gmail account of guests. It's a whole folder so that I can just go through that whenever I have a lag or people that I am running out of people to ask or what have you. I can just go right to that and go down the list. So I'll double check if I did ask him, and if I did not, then we'll just put him at the top of the list to send out an invitation.
All right, and his last name is Holt, Holt, if in case, phonetically it's not coming across on the phone. And his first name is Jacob Holt.
Grand.
Okay, and I'll see if I can send you a link to the site, too, because, his photography is crazy, some of the images that he's gotten. But he travels around the world taking images of all kind of injustice. And I guess that's his so-called contribution to anti-racism or whatever it is. I would love to have him on the show. But I'll see if I could pull up his site, and I'll email a link to you so you can see it.
Grand.
All right.
Outstanding. I assume we nabbed everybody. If not, I'm thinking that we will be here tomorrow. Just tidbits. I can clarify questions that listeners submitted and other things. I wanted to make sure that I get it. I can only say again, Dr. Curry, man, the timing was phenomenal. A lot of people caught the incident that happened in Ohio with the disabled young black child, the student who had been sexually terrorized by the white gang of students and faculty administrators. That is one thing that I thought she said that was accurate, Dr. Stein, in terms of it is not just the white students that have been charged who are culpable in all of this. It is the white administrators, the white faculty at this school. All of them participated in this event and that they should be criminally charged. And what happened, I totally agree. I doubt that will happen. We will see. I know it's early in the stage in all this, but I think a lot of folks did see that report. It was in the Washington Post and some other mainstream outlets. We're talking about that today, but outstanding timing because Dr. Curry had just talked about all of that in terms of black male being victims of sexual terrorism on the part of whites and black disabled individuals and how they are not thought of as disabled. Nonsense interruption. Sorry about that. But yeah, how black disabled individuals are still thought of as threats and victims. Oh, this is somebody that we can terrorize easily and take advantage of. But just talked about that with Dr. Curry. And as I said, I know people emailed me and put it on my Facebook page. It seems like a lot of people are aware of this incident, and we can make time to talk about that as well. My apologies. We had a listener who emailed me a question. I just didn't see it. I'd been checking my email pretty regularly, and then I didn't. Once we got past the 2-hour mark, I wasn't looking, but I missed the question that she wanted to ask. Her question was if Dr. Stein thought the book that she had written was comparable to the terror pornography that she talked about in terms of these images of black people, or talking about reporting on the suffering of black people, if she thought her work was comparable to that. If any of the folks who have the book, she does have some interesting photographs of some of these things in the text. With that, I think I'm good. I don't think there was anything else. She did have some good passages in the book I didn't read that made it very clear. I think we've been talking about this in Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid, where the people, whites, who were allegedly against slavery, that did not mean that they were not white supremacists. She does have some great passages in the book that just make that clear. I think that's important because that's another mythology that gets promoted, that the myth of the good white person, that there are at least a handful of whites who are not in the business of terrorizing black people. I thought that was constructive. She might have had another passage or two in there that was pretty solid on that as well, but we will leave it there for the day. Hopefully it was constructive. If you have questions, problems, guest suggestions, if you can't find something in the archives like Dr. Curtis Duncan or whatever else, feel free. Drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. If you have questions, problems, gripes, complaints, feel free, and we will try to respond in a timely manner. We're also on Twitter @untiljustice. With that, thanks for everyone participating. Grand questions. Hope you got some constructive information. With that, as I said, we should be back tomorrow, and we'll be back on Friday. Harriet Washington, Medical Apartheid. Looking forward to study session number 6. We are halfway through the book. It has been phenomenal. We've had great participation. Hope folks will continue to chime in 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific this coming Friday. With that, again, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. You certainly do not want to be intoxicated with the amount of white rapists, white male and white female rapists and sexual terrorists that are on the loose. You do not want to be in a state where you cannot think clearly and respond should you end up in that sort of incident. And just, man, that is another great example of why it is so important to talk to your children about racism. This sort of thing is happening all the time, even if it's not to that extreme. Just in terms of what black children are facing going to school with these little white brutes on a regular basis, it is critically important that you talk to your children about racism. And this is how you can segue. If you got to have your mandatory teen conversation about alcohol and drugs and all of that, outstanding reason, outstanding piece of logic as to why you want to be sober. Because if you have got to that point where you cannot think clearly and make great decisions, you are just setting yourself up to be totally victimized, violated by whites. Probably some of your little white friends, unfortunately, if you're a non-white child and you unfortunately have some white schoolmates or friends or whatever the case may be. Yes, Sally. Yes, John, that you think is cool, that's on your sports team or whatever the case may be. Yes, you could be setting yourself up to be targeted and victimized by them. Great reason right there to talk to your child about racism, and you can include that when you talk to them about why they should be codified and avoid the alcohol, drugs, all of that, because we are in a system of terrorism. Sobriety would be best for black children, black males, black females, everybody under these conditions. We want to be able to make outstanding decisions to keep ourselves safe at all times. If you're going to be in a vehicle, driver, passenger, pedestrian, you do not want to be under the influence should you be pulled over by Daniel Holtzclaw, Darren Wilson, Daniel Pantaleo, any of these other race soldiers. You never know when they will be pulling up on you. You being intoxicated makes their job 1,000 times easier. That said, buckle up as well. If you're in a vehicle, let's do everything we can to minimize contact with race soldiers. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Mm-hmm. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.